couldn't get comfortable. Happens. Sometimes your brain decides it's the perfect time to replay everything you didn't ask it to. But you're here now, so let me help you unwind. I'll tell you 5 soft stories while the rain hums behind them, and together we'll let the night ease up a little. Story 1. My landlord told me not to open the basement door. The rule was simple. Don't open the basement door. Don't knock on it. Don't press your ear against it. Don't even stand near it too long. That's what Mr. Henriksen told me the day I moved in, his watery blue eyes holding mine with an intensity that didn't match his soft, grandfatherly voice. It's in the lease, he said. Section 12, paragraph 4. You signed it. I had signed it. I'd also skimmed most of it, the way everyone skims leases, looking for the rent amount, the deposit terms, the pet policy. I didn't remember anything about a basement door, but I nodded anyway because the apartment was cheap and I was desperate, and Mr. Henriksen seemed harmless enough despite the strange request. The building was old. That was the first thing anyone noticed about it, a 6-story brick structure wedged between newer construction on a street that had seen better decades. Built in 1919, according to the faded cornerstone, the kind of place that had survived wars and depressions and urban renewal, stubbornly refusing to be torn down or modernized. My apartment was on the 4th floor, 2 rooms plus a bathroom, hardwood floors worn smooth by a century of footsteps, radiators that clanked and hissed like living things. The windows were drafty and the kitchen was barely functional, but the ceilings were high and the rent was $400 below market rate. In this city, that was enough to make me overlook almost anything. I'd just graduated from college 3 months earlier, landed a job at a marketing firm that paid just enough to survive on, and spent weeks searching for a place I could actually afford. Most of what I found was either a shoebox or a scam. Mr. Henriksen's building was neither. It was just old and cheap and came with one strange rule I figured I could easily follow. The basement door was on the ground floor, at the end of a narrow hallway past the mailboxes. I saw it on my first day, when I was hauling boxes up from my car. Just a door, wooden, painted the same institutional green as the walls, with a simple brass knob that looked original to the building. No sign, no lock that I could see. Nothing remarkable about it except the way it sat at the end of that hallway like a period at the end of a sentence. I didn't think much of it then. Old buildings have basements. Basements have doors. Some landlords don't want tenants poking around in mechanical rooms and storage areas. Made sense. The first few weeks were good. I settled into a routine, work during the day, takeout and bad TV at night. Weekend trips to the laundromat 3 blocks over. The building was quiet, mostly older tenants who kept to themselves. I'd nod to them in the hallway, exchange small talk by the mailboxes, but nobody seemed interested in becoming friends. That was fine. I wasn't looking for community. I was looking for a place to sleep that didn't drain my bank account. The radiators took some getting used to. They'd clank on around 6 every evening, filling the apartment with a dry heat that made my throat itch. On rainy nights, and there were a lot of rainy nights that October. I'd lie in bed listening to the water streaming down the windows, the metal ticking as it expanded, the old building groaning and settling around me. It sounds creepy when I describe it now. At the time, it was almost comforting. White noise, the soundtrack of a place that had stood for over 100 years and would probably stand for 100 more. I didn't notice the thing about the basement door until I'd been there about 3 weeks. It was a Saturday morning, and I was heading out to grab coffee. The elevator in the building was ancient and unreliable, so I always took the stairs. Good exercise, I told myself. Though really, I just didn't trust a machine that old with my life. I came down the stairwell, pushed through the door into the ground floor hallway, and nearly ran into Mrs. Brennan from 2B. She was standing frozen in the middle of the hall, staring at the basement door. "Mrs. Brennan?" I said. "You okay?" She startled like I'd fired a gun, turned to look at me with wide, frightened eyes. For a moment, I thought she was having some kind of medical episode. She was in her 70s, lived alone, the type of person you worry about. "Fine," she said quickly, too quickly. "I'm fine. Just thought I heard something." She hurried past me toward the front entrance, not looking back. I stood there for a moment, looking at the basement door. It was maybe 20 feet away, at the end of the hall. Just a door. Same green paint, same brass knob. But now that I was paying attention, I noticed something. The floor in front of it was cleaner than the rest of the hallway. No scuff marks, no wear patterns. Like no one ever walked there. Like everyone gave it a wide berth without even thinking about it. I shook it off and went to get my coffee, but I started watching after that, noticing things. The way other tenants would angle away from that end of the hall, even if it meant taking a longer path to the stairs. The way conversations would die if someone mentioned the basement. The way Mr. Henriksen would appear, sometimes, standing in the lobby, just looking at that door with an expression I couldn't read. 3 weeks into my lease, on a night when the rain was coming down so hard it sounded like static, I woke up at 2 a.m. for no reason I could name. And I heard it for the first time, something moving behind that basement door. 6 floors up, through concrete and brick and a century of settling, I heard it. A slow, wet sound, like something dragging itself across a floor. I told myself it was the rain, the pipes, the building settling. I told myself a lot of things those first few weeks. The sound didn't come every night. That was almost worse. The unpredictability of it. The way I'd lie awake straining to hear something that might not come at all. When it did come, it was always late. 2, 3 in the morning. That slow, wet, dragging sound, muffled by floors and walls, but still somehow present. Like a heartbeat you feel more than hear. It would last a few minutes, then stop. No pattern I could discern, no trigger I could identify. I started sleeping with earplugs, told myself it was because of the radiators. October bled into November. The rain turned colder, mixed with sleet that rattled against my windows like fingernails. I buried myself in work, stayed late at the office more than I needed to, did anything to avoid being alone in my apartment when the sun went down. It wasn't just the sound. It was the building itself, the way it felt different after dark, heavier, more watchful. The way the shadows in the stairwell seemed to pool and thicken on the ground floor near that green door. The way I'd catch myself holding my breath when I passed through the lobby, walking faster than necessary, not looking toward that hallway. I tried to talk to the other tenants about it. Casually, obliquely, the way you approach something you're not sure is real. Mr. Okonkwo in 3A just shook his head when I mentioned the basement. "Don't," he said. That was all. Don't. Then he went back into his apartment and closed the door. The young couple on the 5th floor, I never learned their names, exchanged a look when I brought it up. The woman opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, but the man put his hand on her arm and she stopped. They moved out 2 weeks later. I watched them load a U-Haul in the middle of the night, their faces tight and pale in the streetlight glow. Mrs. Brennan avoided me entirely after our encounter in the hallway. If she saw me coming, she'd turn around and find another route. Once, I caught her watching me from her doorway, and the expression on her face wasn't fear, it was pity. That scared me more than anything else. I started paying closer attention to the basement door, not approaching it. I wasn't that stupid or that brave, but watching it when I passed through the lobby, looking for changes, looking for explanations. The door never changed. Same green paint, same brass knob, same institutional blankness. But the air near it did. There was a smell that hadn't been there before, or maybe had always been there and I'd just started noticing. Faint, organic, like wet soil and something sweeter underneath. The kind of smell that made you think of cellars and old wells and places where things were buried. The temperature dropped too, the closer you got. Not dramatically, nothing you could measure with a thermometer, but enough that your body knew. Your skin knew. The animal part of your brain that remembers what it means when the air turns cold and still. I finally worked up the nerve to ask Mr. Henriksen about it. Found him in the lobby one evening, doing his slow circuit of the mailboxes, checking locks, adjusting the ancient radiator that squatted near the front door. "Mr. Henriksen," I said, "the basement. What's down there?" He went very still, didn't turn around. "Building infrastructure," he said after a long moment. "Boiler, electrical, nothing that concerns tenants." "Then why can't we go down there?" "Because it's not safe." He turned then, and his eyes found mine with that same intensity from move-in day. "The stairs are old, the wiring is old, insurance liability, you understand." I nodded, because what else could I do? But he didn't look away, just stood there, studying me, like he was trying to read something in my face. "You've heard it," he said. Not a question. My throat tightened. "Heard what?" "You know what." He took a step closer, close enough that I could smell the mothballs on his cardigan, see the broken capillaries mapping his cheeks. "Everyone hears it eventually, the ones who stay long enough." "What is it?" He was quiet for a long time. The radiator clanked. Rain streaked down the lobby windows. Somewhere above us, a door opened and closed. "I've owned this building for 43 years, he said finally. "My father owned it before me, his father before him. 106 years. My family has kept this place standing, kept it contained." Contained? But he was already turning away, shuffling toward the stairs with the slow gait of a man who'd carried something heavy for too long. "Don't open the door," he said over his shoulder. "That's all you need to know. That's all anyone needs to know." I stood in the lobby for a long time after he left, staring at that green door at the end of the hallway. The smell was stronger now, or maybe I was just more aware of it. Sweet and rotten and alive somehow, like breath from a mouth that had been closed too long. The rational part of my brain screamed at me to let it go. Pay my cheap rent, keep my head down, don't ask questions about things that didn't concern me. People lived in this building for decades and they were fine. Whatever was behind that door had been behind it for 100 years, and nothing bad had happened, right? But that night, lying in bed, listening to the sleet against my window and the radiator's rhythmic clanking, I heard it again. The dragging sound, wet and slow, closer than before, and underneath it, for the first time, something else. A voice. Low, guttural, speaking words I couldn't understand in a language I didn't recognize. It was coming from the vent. I didn't sleep the rest of that night, just lay there in the dark, covers pulled up to my chin like a child, listening. The voice faded after a few minutes, sinking back down through the building's bones, retreating to wherever it came from. But I could still feel it in the air. A vibration, a presence. Something that hadn't been there before, or something that had always been there and was only now making itself known. The next morning, I called in sick to work. First time I'd ever done that. Then I went to the library. The building had history. Of course it did. 100 years of history, layered like sediment. I spent 6 hours digging through archives, newspaper clippings, property records. Most of it was mundane. Construction permits, ownership transfers, a small fire in 1947 that damaged the top floor. Nothing that explained Mr. Henriksen's warnings. Nothing that explained the door. Then I found the article from 1931. It was buried in a microfilm reel, a small item from a newspaper that didn't exist anymore. Mysterious disappearance at Crescent Street building. 3 tenants had vanished over the course of a single week. No signs of struggle, no witnesses. They'd simply stopped existing, gone from their apartments, gone from their jobs, gone from the world. The article mentioned the basement, Said police had searched it and found nothing. Said the building's owner, a Mr. Henrik Henriksen, the current landlord's grandfather, had been questioned and released. There was more. I kept digging. 1952. A maintenance worker found dead in the lobby, heart attack according to the coroner. He was discovered 10 feet from the basement door, his face frozen in an expression that the newspaper delicately described as disturbed. 1967. Another disappearance. A young woman, 24, who'd lived on the second floor. Her belongings were still in her apartment. Her rent was paid up for the month. She was never found. 1984. A fire in the basement. Small, contained, but it took firefighters hours to put out. The article said they had difficulty accessing the space. It didn't say why. 1998. 2 college students broke into the basement on a dare. One was hospitalized for 3 weeks with what doctors called acute psychological trauma. He never spoke publicly about what he saw. The other transferred schools and left the city entirely. The pattern was there if you knew how to look. Every 15 to 20 years, something happened. Something connected to that basement, to that door. And every time, the Henriksen family was there, owning the building, managing the building, keeping whatever was down there locked away. I left the library with my hands shaking and a photocopy of every article stuffed in my bag. The walk home felt longer than usual. The streets felt emptier. By the time I reached the building, the sun was setting and the windows glowed orange like watching eyes. I stopped in the lobby. The basement door was open. Just a crack, maybe 2 inches, but it was open. That green door that had been closed every single day since I'd moved in, sealed like a tomb, untouched and untouchable. Now it stood ajar, and from the gap came that smell, stronger than ever, wet earth and sweetness and something else, something metallic underneath. Blood, maybe, or rust, or something worse. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, just stood there, staring at that 2-inch gap, watching the darkness beyond it shift and settle like something alive. Then I heard it, not from the vent this time, not muffled by floors and walls. The dragging sound. Right there, right behind that door. Wet, slow, getting closer. My legs unlocked. I stumbled backward, hit the wall, couldn't take my eyes off that gap. The sound was growing louder, and with it came the voice, that low, guttural muttering, those words I couldn't understand, spoken in a rhythm that felt wrong, felt backwards, felt like something being recited or chanted. Something moved in the darkness beyond the door. A shape. Pale. Wrong. I saw fingers. Long, too long, curling around the edge of the door from the inside. Gray-white skin stretched tight over bones that bent in places bones shouldn't bend. Nails that were black and cracked and pointed. They gripped the door frame, started to pull. The door began to open wider. I ran. I don't remember climbing the stairs, don't remember unlocking my apartment. Just remember slamming the door behind me, throwing the deadbolt, the chain, shoving my dresser against it with strength I didn't know I had. Then I sat on my bed and shook for an hour. The sounds didn't follow me up. Whatever I'd seen, whatever I'd almost seen, it stayed down there, behind the door, in the basement where it belonged. But it had been opening the door, from the inside. Something was trying to get out. I grabbed my phone, started to dial 911, then stopped. What would I tell them? That I saw fingers? That something was moving in the basement of my apartment building? They'd think I was crazy. They'd come, find nothing, leave. And then I'd be alone again, in this building, with that thing downstairs and no one who believed me. I needed proof. I needed someone else to see it. I needed to understand what I was dealing with before it got out. The rain started again outside, drumming against my window, filling the silence with white noise that couldn't quite cover the sound of my own heartbeat. Somewhere below me, the building groaned, and I swore I heard laughter. I didn't leave my apartment for 2 days. Called in sick again. Lived on crackers and tap water and the granola bars I kept in my desk drawer. Slept in fits and starts, jerking awake at every sound, every creak of the radiator, every groan of the old pipes. The sounds from below continued every night between 2 and 4 in the morning. The dragging, the voice. And now, sometimes, something that sounded almost like scratching, like nails on wood, like something testing barriers, looking for weak points. On the 3rd day, someone knocked on my door. I nearly screamed, pressed myself against the far wall, heart slamming in my chest, convinced that somehow it had found me, climbed 6 floors, tracked me down. It's Henriksen. The voice was muffled, old, tired. I know you're in there. We need to talk. I didn't move. Please. A word I'd never heard him use before. It's getting stronger. I can't do this alone anymore. Against every instinct, I opened the door. He looked terrible, gray-faced, hollow-eyed, like he hadn't slept in days either. His cardigan was buttoned wrong. His hands trembled at his sides. You saw it, he said. Not a question. I nodded. Then you understand. It's waking up. He pushed past me into my apartment, moving with an urgency that seemed wrong for a man his age. Went straight to my window and looked out at the street below, scanning for something I couldn't see. Every 18 years, he said, still looking out the window. That's the cycle. 18 years of quiet, then it starts to stir, tests the barriers, looks for a way out. What is it? He turned. In the gray afternoon light, he looked ancient, not just old, but worn down, hollowed out by decades of something I was only beginning to understand. My grandfather made a deal, he said. 1919, when he built this place. He found something in the ground. Something that had been buried there for, I don't know how long. Centuries, maybe. Longer. He paused. It offered him things. Power, wealth, protection. All he had to do was give it a home, a place to sleep. And every 18 years, he didn't finish. He didn't have to. The disappearances, I said. The people who vanished. Offerings. The word came out flat, dead. The price of containment. Feed it and it stays dormant. Starve it and it wakes hungry. My father fed it. I fed it. We kept it satisfied, kept it sleeping, kept this city safe from something it doesn't even know exists. My stomach turned. You killed people. I gave it what it needed. His eyes met mine, and there was no apology in them. Only exhaustion. Only the weight of a burden carried too long. Do you think I wanted this? Do you think any of us wanted this? But the alternative, if it gets out, if it feeds freely. A sound cut him off, deep, resonant, shaking the walls. The building shuddered. Henriksen went pale. It's too early. The cycle isn't complete yet. It shouldn't be this strong. What do we do? He was already moving toward the door. Stay here. Lock yourself in. Don't come downstairs no matter what you hear. Wait. But he was gone, his footsteps fading down the hallway, then the stairwell. I heard them descending, floor by floor, getting fainter. Then silence. I stood in my doorway, listening. The building had gone quiet. No radiators, no pipes, no settling sounds. Just a thick, heavy stillness that pressed against my eardrums. I should have stayed, should have locked the door, pushed the dresser back, waited it out like he told me. But I kept thinking about those fingers. That pale, wrong hand gripping the door frame. Whatever was down there, it was trying to get out. And Henriksen was an old man, alone, walking towards something that had been fed human beings for over a century. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and followed him down. The stairwell was dark, darker than it should have been. The emergency lights that usually glowed on each landing were out, all of them, like something had drained the power. I descended by the light of my phone, one hand on the railing, heart pounding so loud I could hear it echoing off the concrete walls. 4th floor, 3rd, 2nd. By the time I reached the ground floor, the smell was overwhelming. That sweet, rotten, organic stench, mixed with something else now. Ozone, like the air before a lightning strike. My eyes watered. My throat burned. The lobby was empty. The basement door was wide open. I could see the stairs leading down, swallowed by darkness so complete my flashlight barely penetrated it. And from that darkness came sounds. Henriksen's voice, chanting something in a language I didn't recognize, and beneath it, another voice, deeper, answering him. Then a scream. Human. Terrified. Cut short. I ran to the doorway, stopped at the top of the stairs, pointed my flashlight down. I saw Henriksen on the basement floor, crumpled against the far wall like he'd been thrown. Blood on his face, not moving. And standing over him, something that had once been human but wasn't anymore. It was tall, 8 feet, maybe more, and thin, so thin I could see the outline of bones beneath skin that looked like wet paper. Its arms hung past its knees, ending in those hands I'd seen before, those wrong fingers with their black nails. Its head was tilted at an angle next, don't bend, and where its face should have been there was only a mouth. Just a mouth, wide, smiling, full of teeth that went back too far. It turned toward me. I couldn't run, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The mouth opened wider. And it spoke. Not in that guttural language, but in English. Clear, precise English. In a voice that sounded like gravel scraping bone. 18 years, it said. But you'll do. It started up the stairs. The spell broke. I ran. I don't remember making it to the front door. Don't remember if I took the stairs or just threw myself down the hallway. One moment I was staring at that thing, that mouth, those endless teeth. And the next I was outside, cold rain hitting my face, my lungs burning, my legs pumping against pavement I couldn't feel. I ran 3 blocks before I stopped, collapsed against a bus shelter, gasping, shaking so hard my teeth chattered. My phone was still clutched in my hand, the flashlight beam pointing uselessly at the wet sidewalk. I made myself turn around, made myself look. The building was still there. 6 stories of brick and history and horror, glowing faintly from the streetlights. The windows were dark. The front door was closed. Nothing came out after me. I called 911 from the bus shelter, told them there was a man hurt in the basement of my building, told them to send help, couldn't tell them why, couldn't explain what I'd seen, just gave them the address and hung up. Then I sat in the rain and waited. The ambulance arrived first, then police. I watched from across the street, hidden in the shadows between 2 parked cars, as they went inside. Watched as they came back out 20 minutes later, empty-handed. Watched as more cars arrived, as officers strung yellow tape across the entrance, as someone in a suit showed up and started making phone calls. They brought Henriksen out on a stretcher around midnight. A white sheet covered his face. I should have felt something. Grief, maybe. Guilt. He'd tried to warn me, tried to keep me safe, and I'd followed him anyway. Because of me, he was dead. Because of me, whatever ritual he'd been performing was interrupted. But all I felt was cold. Cold and hollow, and very, very far away from everything. I didn't go back inside. Not that night, not ever. I slept in a motel for 3 days, paying cash, using a fake name. Jumped at every sound. Checked the locks a dozen times before I could close my eyes. When I finally did sleep, I dreamed of basements and mouths and fingers that bent the wrong way. On the 4th day, I made myself search for news. The building had been condemned. Structural instability, according to the official reports. All tenants evacuated. The whole block cordoned off while engineers assessed the damage. There was no mention of Henriksen's death, no mention of what killed him. Just bureaucratic language and red tape. But I found other things too. Forum posts from people who'd lived in that building years ago. Urban exploration threads about the creepy basement on Crescent Street. Rumors and stories and half-remembered nightmares, all pointing at the same truth no one wanted to name. Something lived in that basement. Something old. Something hungry. And now the man who'd kept it contained was dead. I left the city a week later, packed what little I could salvage from my life, clothes, laptop, documents, and drove until I hit a town I'd never heard of, 3 states away. Found a job, found an apartment, started over, the way you do when you're running from something you can't explain. I tried to forget, tried to convince myself it was over, that whatever I'd seen was someone else's problem now. The building was condemned. The basement was sealed. Surely someone would figure it out, would find a way to contain it again. But I couldn't stop watching the news. 6 months after I left, there was a gas explosion on Crescent Street. 3 buildings damaged. The condemned one, my building, collapsed entirely. 17 people injured in surrounding structures. 2 missing. Never found. A year after that, a construction crew broke ground on the site. New development. Luxury condos. I tracked the project obsessively, waiting for something to happen, waiting for reports of accidents or disappearances or workers who saw things they couldn't explain. Nothing. Just progress reports and marketing materials and glossy renderings of a future that pretended the past didn't exist. Maybe it's over. Maybe the collapse destroyed whatever was down there, buried it under 1,000 tons of brick and concrete and steel. Maybe it's sleeping again, dormant, waiting for someone else to dig it up. Or maybe it got out. That's what keeps me awake at night. Not the memory of what I saw, though that's bad enough, etched into my brain like a scar. It's the uncertainty, the not knowing. I think about Henriksen sometimes, about his family, 3 generations of men who gave their lives to keeping something terrible locked away. About the price they paid, the things they did, the weight they carried, so the rest of us could sleep without knowing what lived beneath our feet. I think about the tenants who disappeared over the years, the ones who were offered up to keep the thing satisfied. I think about whether they knew what was happening, whether they had time to be afraid, whether there was anything left of them afterward. I think about that mouth, those teeth, the way it said "you'll do" in a voice that sounded like it had been practicing human speech for centuries and still hadn't gotten it quite right. I was supposed to be the next offering, the next meal. If Henriksen had lived, would he have fed me to it? Or was he trying to stop the cycle finally after all those years? I'll never know. What I do know is this. I check every basement before I sign a lease now. I research building histories, ownership records, anything that might tell me what's underneath. I don't trust old buildings, don't trust landlords who smile too much or have rules they won't explain. And I never, ever open doors I'm told to leave closed. Some rules exist for a reason. Some warnings aren't meant to be ignored. I learned that the hard way, in a building on Crescent Street, in a basement that should have stayed sealed. I got out. I survived. But late at night, when the rain is falling and the radiator is clicking and the old sounds of an old building settle around me, I still listen. I still hear it, and I wonder if it hears me too. Story 2. The folder on my laptop full of photos of me. I found the folder on a Tuesday while I was trying to clear space for a software update. My laptop had been running slow for weeks, and I'd finally gotten annoyed enough to dig through the files and delete whatever I didn't need. Old downloads, duplicate photos, PDFs from classes I'd finished years ago. The digital clutter of a life lived mostly online. The folder was buried 3 levels deep in my documents, inside a subfolder I'd labeled MISC 2019 and hadn't opened since. It was named with a string of numbers and letters, something like D7X9, a 2_ backup, the kind of file name that looks auto-generated, forgettable, exactly the sort of thing you'd skip right over. I almost did skip over it. Almost just deleted the whole Miss 2019 folder without checking what was inside. But something made me click. Curiosity, maybe. Or the fact that I didn't remember creating any folder with that name. The folder contained 142 photographs. All of them were of me. I didn't understand what I was looking at, not at first. My brain kept trying to make it make sense, kept reaching for explanations that didn't require the world to be as wrong as it suddenly felt. Maybe I'd set up some kind of automatic photo backup and forgotten about it. Maybe these were screenshots from video calls, captured without me realizing. Maybe there was some reasonable, boring explanation that would make me laugh at myself for being paranoid. But the photos weren't from video calls. They weren't selfies or screenshots or anything I could have taken myself. They were taken from across rooms, from doorways, from angles that meant someone else had been holding the camera, someone standing in my apartment, watching me, while I had no idea they were there. My name is Jenna. I'm 24 years old, and I've lived alone in this apartment for almost 2 years. It's a one-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a mid-rise building, nothing fancy but decent enough. Secure entrance, key fob for the elevator, deadbolt on my door. I moved here after college because the rent was manageable and the neighborhood felt safe. Coffee shops and bookstores, young professionals walking their dogs, the kind of place where you don't think twice about coming home late. I work remotely as a graphic designer, which means I spend most of my time in this apartment, at my desk by the window or curled up on the couch with my laptop. I know every corner of this place. Know the way the afternoon light hits the kitchen counter. Know which floorboards creak near the bathroom. Know the exact sound the refrigerator makes when it cycles on at night. This apartment is my space, my sanctuary. I've always felt safe here. The photos went back 18 months. I scrolled through them slowly, my hands trembling on the trackpad, my chest getting tighter with every image. There I was, asleep in my bed, covers pulled up to my chin, completely unaware. There I was, cooking dinner, my back to whoever was taking the picture. There I was, sitting at my desk in my pajamas, headphones on, focused on my screen while someone stood behind me and captured the moment. The timestamps were scattered, some from late at night, some from early morning, a few from the middle of the day. There was no pattern I could see, no logic to when they'd been taken. Just 142 moments from my life that I thought were private, that I thought were mine alone, documented by someone who had been close enough to touch me. I found one from 6 days ago. I was on my couch, watching TV, a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. I remembered that night, remembered feeling cozy and content, remembered thinking how nice it was to have a quiet evening to myself. In the photo, you could see the TV screen reflected in the window behind me. You could see my face, relaxed and oblivious. And in the bottom corner of the frame, just barely visible, you could see a shadow on the wall that didn't belong to me. Someone had been standing in my hallway 6 days ago while I sat there, thinking I was alone. I slammed the laptop shut and sat there, heart pounding, ears ringing, trying to convince myself this wasn't real. A prank, maybe. Someone had hacked my laptop, was messing with me, had photoshopped these images to scare me. That had to be it. That had to be it, because the alternative, that someone had been coming into my apartment for a year and a half, standing in my rooms while I slept and cooked and lived my life. I couldn't think about that, couldn't let myself go there, but my body already knew. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely pick up my phone. My throat was tight and dry, and there was a cold, sick feeling spreading through my stomach. The kind of fear that lives in your bones, in your cells, in the animal part of your brain that knows when you're prey. I made myself open the laptop again, made myself look at the folder, at the file names, at the metadata. The photos were real. They hadn't been downloaded from somewhere else or edited together. They'd been taken on a device, a phone probably, and transferred to my laptop. placed in that buried folder where I'd never think to look. Whoever did this had access to my apartment, and they had access to my laptop. They'd been inside my home, inside my life, inside my most private moments, and I hadn't known. For 18 months, I hadn't known. I looked around my apartment at the familiar walls and furniture and shadows, and for the first time since I'd moved in, I didn't recognize it. It felt foreign now, contaminated. Every corner was a place where someone could have stood. Every doorway was a frame for a photograph I never consented to. The rain had started outside, streaking down my window, filling the silence with soft static. I used to love that sound, used to find it comforting, the way it made my apartment feel cozy and enclosed. Now it just meant I couldn't hear if someone was at my door. I called my best friend Mira first. She picked up on the third ring, her voice cheerful and normal, and I almost started crying just hearing it. I tried to explain what I'd found, but the words came out jumbled, frantic. She told me to slow down, to breathe, to start from the beginning. So I did, and when I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "You need to call the police," she said. "Right now, tonight." "And tell them what? That I found photos on my own laptop?" I was pacing my apartment, checking locks I'd already checked twice. "They're going to think I'm crazy. They're going to think I put them there and forgot, or that someone's playing a prank, or..." "Jenna," her voice was firm, the way it got when she wasn't going to let me spiral. "Someone has been in your apartment, multiple times, while you were sleeping. This isn't a prank. This is stalking. This is breaking and entering. The police need to know." She was right. I knew she was right. But there was a part of me, a stupid, desperate part, that still wanted this to be a mistake, a glitch, anything other than what it obviously was. I told her I'd call them in the morning, that I just needed to get through the night first. She offered to come over, to stay with me, but she lived 40 minutes away and the roads were slick with rain. I told her I'd be fine, told her I'd lock everything, keep my phone close, call her if anything happened. She made me promise 3 times before she let me hang up. After we got off the phone, I went back to the laptop. I didn't want to look at the photos again, but I needed to understand. Needed to find something that would tell me who had done this, or how, or why. I forced myself to go through them methodically, one by one, looking for details I'd missed the first time. Most of them were taken in low light, nighttime shots, early morning shots, moments when I was asleep or distracted or had my back turned. Whoever took them knew how to stay hidden, knew how to move quietly, knew exactly when I'd be most vulnerable. The thought made my skin crawl. They'd studied me, learned my patterns, figured out when it was safe to get close. Some of the photos were uncomfortably intimate. Me stepping out of the shower, towel wrapped around my body, water still dripping from my hair. Me changing clothes in my bedroom, caught mid-motion, my shirt halfway over my head. Me asleep in positions that felt exposed, covers kicked off on warm nights. My face slack and defenseless. These weren't surveillance photos. They were trophies. Someone had been collecting moments of me at my most private, my most unguarded, and saving them like souvenirs. I noticed other things too. Small details that told a story I didn't want to hear. In several photos, objects in my apartment had been moved. A book shifted on my nightstand, a mug placed in a different spot on the counter, my laptop angled slightly different than I'd left it. I'd noticed these things before, I realized. I'd noticed and dismissed them, blamed myself for being forgetful, for not paying attention. But I wasn't forgetful. Someone had been touching my things, and I'd been gaslighting myself into thinking it was nothing. The worst photo was one I almost scrolled past. It was darker than the others, grainier, taken from the doorway of my bedroom while I slept. But in this one, unlike the others, you could see part of the photographer's reflection in my closet mirror. Just a sliver, a shoulder, maybe part of a jaw, the edge of what looked like a dark jacket. Not enough to identify anyone, but enough to prove beyond any doubt that this was real. That someone had stood in that doorway, pointed a camera at me, and captured their own shadow in the frame. I enlarged the image until the pixels broke apart, studied that fragment of reflection until my eyes burned. The shoulder looked masculine, broad. The jacket could have been navy or black, something plain and forgettable. There was nothing distinctive, nothing I recognized. It could have been anyone. That was almost worse than knowing who it was. I started thinking about everyone who had access to my apartment. The list was short, too short to be comforting. My building had a secure entrance, but that just meant the intruder had a way in. They either lived here, worked here, or had copied a key. I thought about the maintenance staff, the property manager, the guy who'd installed my internet 2 years ago. I thought about neighbors I'd smiled at in the elevator, delivery drivers who'd handed me packages at my door, the locksmith I'd called once when I'd locked myself out. Any of them could have made a copy of my key. Any of them could have been watching me, waiting for opportunities, slipping into my apartment while I was asleep or in the shower or lost in my work with headphones on. I'd always felt safe here because the building felt secure. But security meant nothing if the threat was already inside. I checked every window. Checked the lock on my door, the deadbolt, the chain. Everything was secure. Everything looked normal. And that was the most terrifying part. There was no sign of forced entry, no broken locks, no evidence that anyone had been here at all. Just 142 photographs that proved someone had found a way in and out without leaving a trace. The rain kept falling outside, steady and relentless. I turned off all the lights, except the lamp by my bed, then changed my mind and turned them all back on. I couldn't decide which was worse, being visible or being in the dark. Either way, I felt exposed. Either way, I felt watched. I didn't sleep that night, just sat on my couch with a kitchen knife in my lap, watching my front door, listening to every sound the building made. The elevator humming up and down, footsteps in the hallway that passed my door and kept going, the rain on the windows, endless and gray. Every noise was a potential threat, every silence was worse. Somewhere around 3 a.m. I heard something that made my blood freeze. A soft click, barely audible, coming from somewhere near my front door. Like a lock being tested, like someone checking to see if I'd forgotten to secure the deadbolt. I held my breath and watched the doorknob. It didn't move. Nothing happened. After 5 minutes, that felt like 5 hours. I convinced myself I'd imagined it. But I didn't put the knife down. And I didn't close my eyes. Morning came gray and exhausted, the rain finally tapering off to a thin mist that clung to the windows. I'd made it through the night. Nothing had happened. No one had tried the door again. No shadows had moved across my walls. In the pale light of day, sitting there with a kitchen knife in my lap and dark circles under my eyes, I almost felt foolish. Almost. I called the police at 8 a.m. The officer who answered sounded bored until I explained what I'd found. Then his voice sharpened, became professional. He said someone would be there within the hour. I spent the time showering with the bathroom door open, getting dressed in record time, jumping at every sound. By the time the knock came, I was so wound up I nearly screamed. 2 officers showed up, a man and a woman, both young and serious-faced. I showed them the folder, the photos, explained the timeline as best I could. They looked at each other in a way I didn't like, not disbelieving exactly, but troubled. The female officer, whose name tag said Delgado, asked if anyone else had access to my apartment. I gave her my short list: the building manager, maintenance, the locksmith from 18 months ago. 18 months, she repeated. That's when the photos start. I nodded. The locksmith had come in September of last year, right after I'd locked myself out. He'd been perfectly normal, middle-aged, polite, finished the job in 20 minutes. I'd tipped him and never thought about him again. but now that date sat in my mind like a splinter, impossible to ignore. Officer Delgado took down his information, along with everything else I could remember. They photographed my laptop screen, the folder, the metadata. They checked my locks, my windows, the fire escape that ran past my bedroom. Everything was secure. No signs of tampering, no evidence that anyone had forced their way in. "That's the problem," the male officer said. His name was Chen. "Whoever's doing this has a key, or access to one. Have you considered changing your locks?" I hadn't. The thought hadn't even occurred to me until he said it, and then I felt stupid for not thinking of it sooner. Of course I needed to change my locks. Of course, that was the first thing I should have done. But I'd been so focused on the horror of what I'd found that I hadn't moved past it to the practical steps of protecting myself. They gave me a case number and a card with a detective's name on it. Said they'd look into the locksmith, check for any prior complaints. Told me to change my locks immediately, consider staying somewhere else for a few days, call if anything else happened. Standard advice, delivered with genuine concern, but it still felt hollow. They couldn't post a guard outside my door. They couldn't undo 18 months of violation. They could only take notes and tell me to be careful. After they left, I called a locksmith, a different company this time, one Mira recommended. He could come that afternoon, 4 hours away. 4 more hours of sitting in an apartment that didn't feel like mine anymore, jumping at shadows, wondering if whoever did this was watching me right now, seeing the police cars, knowing I'd found the folder. I decided to search the apartment, really search it, the way I should have done last night instead of just sitting there paralyzed. I started in the bedroom, going through every drawer, every shelf, every space where something could be hidden. I checked under the bed, behind the furniture, inside the closet where that reflection had been captured. Nothing. Just my own belongings, undisturbed and ordinary. The living room was the same. Kitchen, bathroom, the small coat closet by the front door. I was thorough, methodical, trying to channel the fear into something productive, and I was about to give up, about to convince myself that the photos were the only evidence, when I found it. The air vent in my hallway ceiling. I'd walked past it 1,000 times without really seeing it. Just a metal grate, painted the same off-white as the ceiling, utterly unremarkable. But something about it looked different now. The screws weren't sitting quite flush. One corner of the grate was slightly raised, like it had been removed and replaced without being properly secured. I grabbed a chair from the kitchen and climbed up to look closer. My hands were shaking as I reached for the grate, fingers brushing the cold metal. It moved, lifted right out of the frame with almost no resistance, like it had been taken down and put back dozens of times. Inside the vent, pushed back just far enough to be invisible from below, I found a phone. An old smartphone, the screen cracked, the case scratched and worn. Not mine. I'd never seen it before in my life. It was powered off, but when I pressed the button, it flickered to life with 12% battery remaining. No passcode, no lock screen, just a home screen with a single folder labeled with my address. I opened the folder with fingers that felt like they belonged to someone else. Inside were hundreds of photos. Not just the 142 I'd found on my laptop, more, newer ones. Photos from this week, from yesterday, from this morning, while I'd sat on my couch with the knife, staring at the door, thinking I was alone. He'd been here, while I was awake, while I was watching, while I thought I was safe. He'd been above me, in the ceiling, looking down through the vent, taking pictures while I waited for a threat that was already inside. I dropped the phone and stumbled off the chair, my vision swimming, my lungs refusing to work properly. The apartment spun around me. I braced myself against the wall and tried to breathe, tried to think, tried to do anything except collapse into the panic that was clawing at my chest. He had access to the vents. The whole building's vent system, probably, a network of passages that ran through every apartment, every hallway, every space people thought was private. He could go anywhere, see anything. and no amount of new locks would keep him out. I grabbed my phone and called Delgado's number with shaking hands. When she answered, I could barely get the words out. "He's in the walls," I said. "He's been watching me from inside the walls." The next 2 hours were a blur of uniforms and radios and voices asking questions I could barely process. Delgado came back with Chen and 2 additional officers, then a detective, then a crime scene technician who photographed everything while I sat on my couch, wrapped in a blanket someone had given me, shaking despite the warmth. They found more than just the phone. Once they started looking, really looking, with flashlights and ladders and the building's maintenance blueprints spread across my kitchen counter, they found evidence everywhere. The vent in my hallway was just one access point. There were others in my bedroom ceiling, in my bathroom, even one in the closet that opened into a crawl space I hadn't known existed. The building was old, built in the 70s when codes were different and the space between floors was larger than modern construction allowed. Large enough for someone to move through. Large enough for someone to live. That's what the detective said, his face grim as he showed me the photos on his own phone. "There's a space above your apartment, between your ceiling and the floor above. We found bedding, food wrappers, bottles." He paused, like he was trying to figure out how to say the next part. "He's been staying up there, possibly for months." I couldn't speak, couldn't do anything except stare at the images on his screen. A nest of blankets and pillows wedged between ceiling joists, empty chip bags and water bottles scattered around, a small battery-powered lantern that explained how he could see in the dark. Someone had built a home above my home, a shadow life layered on top of mine, and I'd had no idea. I'd slept and showered and cried and laughed and lived my life while he lay 3 feet above my head, listening to everything. The crime scene tech found more phones in the crawl space, 3 of them, all older models, all filled with photos, not just of me, of other women too. Different apartments, different buildings, different faces frozen in moments of private vulnerability. The detective told me they'd need to investigate, to figure out how many victims there were, to try to identify the women and warn them. His voice was steady and professional, but I could see the horror in his eyes. This wasn't a one-time stalker. This was a predator with a system. "Do you know who he is?" My voice came out thin, cracked. "Do you have any idea?" "We're working on it." He handed me a card with his name and number. Detective Marcus Webb. The phones might give us something. Fingerprints, purchase records, stored accounts. And we're pulling the building's security footage, employment records, anyone who's had access to maintenance areas in the past 2 years. They thought it was someone who worked here. Someone with keys and knowledge of the building's hidden spaces. Someone who could move through the walls without anyone noticing. The maintenance staff was small, 3 men who rotated shifts, plus the building manager who oversaw everything. Any of them could have done this. All of them had opportunity. I thought about the times I'd passed them in the hallway, smiled at them, made small talk while waiting for the elevator. Had it been one of them? Had they stood there talking to me about the weather while knowing exactly what my bedroom looked like at 3 a.m., exactly how I slept, exactly what I looked like with my guard down? The thought made me want to scrub my skin until it bled. Mira arrived around noon, her face pale and scared, and immediately wrapped me in a hug that lasted longer than any hug we'd ever shared. She'd taken the day off work, driven 40 minutes through leftover rain, and showed up with a suitcase already packed with my name on it. "You're staying with me," she said. "I don't care for how long. You're not coming back here until they catch him." I didn't argue. Couldn't have stayed even if I'd wanted to. The apartment was a crime scene now, but more than that, it was ruined. Every corner was contaminated by the knowledge of what had happened there. The ceiling was no longer just a ceiling. It was a membrane, a barrier that had been breached, a lie I'd believed for 18 months. I would never feel safe within those walls again. The police let me pack a bag while they continued processing the scene. I moved through my bedroom like a stranger, grabbing clothes and toiletries and my laptop, trying not to look at the vent in the ceiling, trying not to imagine the eye that had pressed against those slats night after night, watching. My hands felt numb. Everything felt numb. A protective haze that I knew would wear off eventually, leaving nothing but raw, exposed nerve. Before I left, Detective Webb pulled me aside. His expression had changed since the last time we spoke. Harder now, more urgent. "We found something else in the crawl space," he said quietly. "Something I need you to see." He showed me a photo on his phone, a piece of paper, crumpled and smoothed out again, covered in handwriting I didn't recognize. It was a list of times. My times. What time I woke up. What time I went to bed. What time I showered. What time I worked. What time I made dinner. But at the bottom, below all the observations, there was something else. A single line, underlined twice. Soon. "We don't know what it means," Webb said, "but I think you need to take it seriously. Whoever this is, he wasn't just watching. He was planning something, and we don't know how close he was to doing it." I stared at that word until my vision blurred. Soon. Such a small word. Such an ordinary word. But in that context, written in that handwriting, placed at the end of that list, it felt like a countdown I hadn't known was running. A timer ticking toward something I didn't want to imagine. Mira drove me to her apartment in silence. The rain had stopped, but the sky stayed gray, heavy with clouds that refused to break. I watched the city slide past my window and tried to feel something other than the cold, hollow terror that had settled into my bones. I was safe now. I was away from that building, away from those vents, away from whoever had been living above me. The police were investigating. They would find him. They had to find him. But that word kept echoing in my head, over and over, like a heartbeat I couldn't silence. Soon. They caught him 11 days later. His name was Gerald Mott. 53 years old, employed by the building's maintenance company for the past 4 years. He'd worked on my apartment twice, once to fix a leaky faucet, once to replace a smoke detector battery. Both times I'd let him in, offered him water, thanked him when he was done. Both times he'd been quiet and professional and utterly forgettable. The kind of man you pass in the hallway and don't think about again. The kind of man who could disappear into the background of your life without leaving a ripple. The police found him in the crawl space of another building 6 blocks away, a newer property where he'd also worked maintenance. He'd moved there after the investigation started, after he realized the police were closing in. They found him with a backpack full of supplies, 3 more phones, and a journal filled with notes about women he'd been watching across the city. 12 victims that they could identify from the photos. Probably more they'd never know about. Detective Webb called me the morning after the arrest. His voice sounded tired but relieved, the voice of someone who'd been carrying a weight and finally set it down. He told me what they'd found, what Mott had admitted to in his initial interrogation. The man had been doing this for over a decade, moving from building to building, job to job, finding spaces in the walls and ceilings where he could hide and watch. He'd never escalated beyond watching, never touched anyone, never made contact. But the journal suggested he'd been getting closer. The word "soon" had appeared multiple times, next to different names, in entries going back years. Like he was always building towards something he never quite reached. I asked Webb what would happen now. He said Mott was being charged with stalking, breaking and entering, and a list of other offenses that would likely keep him in prison for a long time. There would be a trial. I might have to testify. But for now, it was over. The man who had lived above my ceiling, who had photographed me sleeping, who had written my schedule in his notebook and underlined "soon," he was locked in a cell where he couldn't reach me anymore. I thanked Webb and hung up. Then I sat on Mira's couch and stared at the wall for a long time, waiting to feel something. Relief, maybe. Closure. The satisfaction of knowing he'd been caught, that justice was being served. that I could move on with my life. But the feelings didn't come. There was just a hollow space where the fear had been, an emptiness that didn't know how to fill itself. Mira let me stay with her for 2 months. She never complained, never made me feel like a burden, just quietly adjusted her life to make room for mine. I slept on her couch, and then, eventually, in her spare room when she cleared it out for me. I went to therapy twice a week. I took medication that helped me sleep without dreaming. I did all the things you're supposed to do when something terrible happens, all the steps that are supposed to lead you back to normal. I never went back to my apartment. Couldn't even drive past the building without my chest tightening, my breath catching in my throat. I broke my lease, paid the penalty, had Mira and her boyfriend pack up my things while I waited in the car with the doors locked and my hands gripping the steering wheel. Everything from that place felt contaminated. The furniture, the clothes, even the books I'd loved. I donated most of it and started over with things that didn't carry memories of being watched. The trial happened 8 months later. I testified for 45 minutes, describing what I'd found, what I'd felt, what it was like to learn that my home had never really been mine. Mott sat at the defense table the whole time, watching me with the same blank expression he must have worn while he lay above my ceiling, listening to me live my life. I made myself look at him once, just once. His eyes were flat and empty, the eyes of someone who saw other people as objects, as collections of moments to be captured and cataloged. I looked away and didn't look back. He was convicted on all counts, sentenced to 22 years with no possibility of parole for at least 15. The judge called his actions a profound violation of human dignity and said she hoped the sentence would give his victims some measure of peace. I sat in the courtroom and listened to the words and tried to feel that peace she was talking about. It didn't come then either. It's been almost 2 years now. I live in a different city, a different state, a ground floor apartment with no crawl spaces and no ceiling vents. I had a contractor inspect every inch of the place before I signed the lease, paid him $300 to confirm that there was nowhere for someone to hide, nowhere for someone to watch. He probably thought I was paranoid. I didn't care. I still check the ceilings in every room I enter, still look up at vents and wonder what's behind them, who might be looking back. I still sleep with a chair wedged under my bedroom doorknob and a knife in my nightstand drawer. The fear has faded to something manageable, something I can live around, but it never really goes away. It's part of me now, woven into the way I move through the world, the way I assess every space for threats I never used to imagine. Sometimes, late at night, I think about those 18 months when I didn't know. All those evenings I spent feeling safe, feeling private, feeling alone in the best possible way. I think about how easily that feeling was taken from me, how thin the barrier was between my life and his, how close I came to being more than just a collection of photographs in a folder. I think about that word, underlined twice in his notebook, soon. And I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't found that folder when I did, if I'd just deleted it without looking, if I'd given him a few more weeks or months to watch and wait and plan. I wonder what soon would have looked like. And then I stop wondering, because some questions are better left unanswered. Some doors are better left closed. I survived. I got out. And every day I wake up in a home that's truly mine, with walls I can trust and ceilings I've verified and locks that only I control. That's enough. It has to be enough. But I never stop checking, and I never will. Story 3. The payphone that rang at an abandoned rest stop. The rest stop looked wrong from the moment my headlights swept across it. I'd been driving for 9 hours straight, pushing through Nevada on I-80 with nothing but coffee and bad radio stations to keep me company. The plan was to make it to Sacramento by morning, crash at my brother's place, start figuring out what came next. Behind me was a failed engagement, a job that had laid me off 2 weeks before Christmas, and an apartment I couldn't afford anymore. Ahead was the uncertain promise of starting over. At 2 a.m. on a Tuesday in January, somewhere between Elko and Winnemucca, I was running on fumes in more ways than one. The sign had said, "Rest area, 1 mile." And I'd taken the exit without thinking, my bladder making the decision for me. But as I pulled off the highway and followed the access road into the darkness, something felt off. The parking lot was empty, which wasn't unusual for this hour. What was unusual was the state of the place. The overhead lights were out, the building at the center looked dark and shuttered, and weeds had pushed up through the cracks in the asphalt until the whole lot looked more like a field than a rest stop. I pulled into a spot near the building anyway, too tired to get back on the highway and find somewhere else. My headlights illuminated a brick structure with boarded-up windows and a padlocked door, the kind of utilitarian architecture that had probably been built in the 70s and forgotten about ever since. A faded sign above the entrance read, "Nevada Department of Transportation," but half the letters were missing. Trash had accumulated against the walls, old newspapers, plastic bags, things the wind had carried here and abandoned. The place had been closed for years. That much was obvious. I sat in my car with the engine running, wondering why the sign on the highway hadn't been updated, wondering if I should just piss behind a bush and get back on the road. The smart thing would have been to leave immediately, to trust the instinct that was telling me something was wrong about this place. But I was exhausted and annoyed, and my bladder wasn't interested in smart decisions. I got out of the car. The cold hit me first, January in the high desert. That dry, bitter cold that seeps into your bones and makes you feel like you'll never be warm again. The wind was blowing steadily from the west, carrying with it the smell of sagebrush and dust and something else underneath, something faintly metallic that I couldn't identify. I left my headlights on and walked toward the building, figuring I'd find a corner somewhere to take care of business and then get the hell out of there. That's when I noticed the payphone. It was mounted on the side of the building, near what had probably been the main entrance. An old metal housing, dull silver, the kind of payphone you used to see everywhere before cell phones made them obsolete. The receiver hung from its cord, swaying slightly in the wind. Even in the weak spill of my headlights, I could see that it was ancient, rusted around the edges, the coin slot dark and empty, the instruction placard so faded it was barely legible. I walked past it without a second thought, found a spot around the corner of the building, away from the road, and relieved myself against the brick wall like the classy individual I am. The whole time, that feeling of wrongness kept building in my chest. The silence was too complete. No cars on the highway, no animals in the brush, not even the sound of my own footsteps echoing the way they should. Just the wind and my breathing and that faint metallic smell that seemed stronger now, closer. I finished up and headed back toward my car, walking faster than I needed to. I was maybe 20 feet from the driver's door when the sound stopped me cold. The payphone was ringing. I stood there, frozen, staring at it. The ring was loud in the silence. That old-fashioned mechanical bell sound, the kind phones haven't made in decades. It rang once, twice, 3 times. The receiver was still hanging off the hook, swaying in the wind. But the phone was ringing anyway, which wasn't possible, which didn't make any kind of sense. I told myself it was a malfunction, some glitch in old wiring, some electrical short that made the bell go off randomly. Rest stops like this had been connected to landlines once, back when that was the only option. Maybe the lines were still live, maybe someone had dialed a wrong number, maybe there was a rational explanation that would make me feel like an idiot for being scared. The phone rang again, and again. Insistent, patient, like whoever was calling knew I was standing there and was willing to wait. I should have gotten in my car, should have driven away and never looked back, never thought about this place again. That's what a smart person would have done. That's what I would tell anyone else to do if they described this situation to me. But I was tired, and curious. And some part of me, the same part that had driven 9 hours through the night to escape a life that was falling apart, wanted to know. Wanted to understand why a payphone at an abandoned rest stop in the middle of nowhere, Nevada, was ringing at 2 a.m. on a freezing January night. I walked over to the phone, reached out and lifted the receiver from its cradle, brought it to my ear, my hand shaking from the cold or from something else, and said the only thing I could think to say. "Hello." The voice that answered didn't sound human. It sounded like static shaped into words, like something trying to remember how speech was supposed to work. But the words themselves were clear enough, and they turned my blood to ice. "You shouldn't have stopped here, Nate." It knew my name. I nearly dropped the receiver. My hand jerked back instinctively, but I didn't hang up. Couldn't hang up. Couldn't move. Couldn't do anything except to stand there with the phone pressed to my ear, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps that fogged in the cold air. "Who is this?" My voice came out thin and cracked, the voice of someone who already knew they weren't going to like the answer. "How do you know my name?" The static shifted, rearranged itself. When the voice came back, it was clearer, more defined, like something tuning itself to a frequency it had almost forgotten. "I know everyone who stops here, Nate. I've been waiting a long time for someone to answer." The wind picked up, cutting through my jacket like it wasn't there. Behind me, my car sat idling in the darkness, headlights still cutting twin beams across the cracked asphalt. 20 feet away, I could hang up the phone, get in the car, and be gone in 30 seconds. There was nothing keeping me here, nothing except the voice on the line and whatever broken part of me needed to understand what was happening. "That's not possible," I said. "This phone shouldn't even work. The place is abandoned. There's no power. No." "You stopped here because you're running," the voice interrupted. "Running from a woman who loved you until you made her stop. Running from a job that used you up and threw you away. Running west because you don't know where else to go." A pause. The static crackled like something breathing. "They all run from something, the ones who stop here. That's how I find them." My stomach dropped. There was no way anyone could know those things. No way some stranger with access to an old payphone could have that kind of information. I hadn't told anyone except my brother about the engagement, and even he didn't know all the details. The things the voice was saying, it was pulling them from somewhere it shouldn't have access to, somewhere inside me. "What do you want?" I whispered. "I want you to understand." The voice had changed again, taken on a texture that was almost sad. "This place wasn't always empty, Nate. Families stopped here. Truckers slept in the parking lot. Children ran across this concrete while their parents stretched their legs and breathed the desert air. It was a waypoint between lives, a pause in the journey, and then they closed it. Shut off the lights and left it to rot, and everyone forgot it existed." I looked around at the dark building, the overgrown lot, the emptiness that pressed in from all sides. The interstate was maybe a quarter-mile away, but I couldn't see it from here. Just darkness and desert and the faint outline of mountains against a starless sky. It felt like the rest of the world had ceased to exist, like this rest stop was a bubble cut off from everything I knew. "What happened here?" I asked, even though I knew I shouldn't. Even though every instinct I had was screaming at me to hang up and run. "People stopped coming," the voice said. "But I never left. I've been here for 37 years, Nate, waiting in the wires, waiting for the phone to ring, for someone to hear me, for someone to remember that I existed." The receiver had grown warm in my hand, not from my body heat. Warmer than that, almost hot, like something was building inside the metal housing. The phone cord swayed in the wind, but there was no wind now. The air had gone completely still, and the silence pressed against my ears like a physical weight. "I don't understand," I said. "What are you? How are you doing this?" "I'm what gets left behind." The voice was clearer than ever now, and underneath the static I could hear something else. A faint echo, like a second voice whispering the same words a half-second later. When something terrible happens in a place, and no one comes to clean it up, and the years pile on top of each other until even the memory fades, something stays, something hungry, a sound from behind me. I spun around, the receiver still clutched in my hand, the cord stretching taut. My car was still there, headlights still on, but something had changed. There was a shape in the passenger seat now, a dark silhouette, human-sized, sitting perfectly still and facing forward. I hadn't locked my doors. "You see it now," the voice said, and I realized it wasn't coming from the phone anymore. It was coming from everywhere, from the building, from the asphalt, from the air itself. They all see it, eventually, the ones who answer the phone. I dropped the receiver. It swung on its cord, bouncing against the metal housing, and I could still hear the voice coming from the speaker, even though it was 3 feet away now, still talking, still explaining, still telling me things I didn't want to know. I ran for my car, grabbed the door handle, yanked it open, threw myself inside. The passenger seat was empty. Nothing there, no silhouette, no shape, just my jacket and my phone and an empty coffee cup from the last gas station. I must have imagined it. Must have seen a shadow, a trick of the light, something my exhausted brain had conjured out of fear and adrenaline. I slammed the door and reached for the ignition. The engine was still running. I'd never turned it off, so all I had to do was shift into reverse and get out of here. Simple. Easy. I'd be back on the highway in 30 seconds and none of this would matter. But when I looked up at the rearview mirror, I saw something that made my heart stop. The payphone receiver was back on the hook, and in the reflection of my headlights against the building's brick wall, I could see someone standing in the darkness behind my car, tall and thin and perfectly still, watching me with eyes I couldn't see but could somehow feel. The shape from the passenger seat hadn't been my imagination. It had gotten out of my car and walked around behind it, and now it was between me and the exit. For a long moment, I couldn't move. My hands were frozen on the steering wheel, my foot hovering over the gas pedal, my eyes locked on the rearview mirror and the shape that stood motionless in my headlights' glow. It was wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. Too tall, too thin, proportions that didn't quite match anything human. Its edges seemed to blur and shift, like static on an old television, like something that wasn't fully tuned into this frequency of reality. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to floor it. Reverse straight back, hit it if I had to, then spin around and get out of here. It was just a shape. Just a person, probably. Some homeless drifter living in the abandoned building. Some tweaker who'd wandered in from the desert. There had to be an explanation. There was always an explanation. But my body wouldn't listen. Some deeper instinct, some ancient part of my brain that remembered what it meant to be prey, had taken over. It knew what I was looking at wasn't human. It knew that if I moved too fast, if I drew attention to myself, something very bad would happen. The figure tilted its head, slowly, deliberately, like it was studying me through the rear windshield. I couldn't see its face, couldn't see any features at all, just that dark silhouette against the faint glow of the desert sky. But I felt its attention settle on me like a physical weight. My skin crawled. My stomach churned. Every hair on my body stood on end, and I realized I was holding my breath, had been holding it for God knows how long. Then it started walking toward my car, not fast, not slow, just a steady, unhurried pace, like it had all the time in the world, like it knew I wasn't going anywhere. Each step brought it closer to my rear bumper, closer to my trunk, closer to the backseat window where I'd be able to see it clearly if I turned around. I didn't turn around. Couldn't make myself look at it directly. Couldn't face whatever was wearing that shape and moving with that terrible patience. My foot found the gas pedal. I shifted into reverse without thinking, without planning, just pure animal instinct taking over. The car lurched backward, tires screaming against the cracked asphalt, and I braced for impact, for the thud of a body against metal, for the sickening confirmation that I'd hit something solid. The impact never came. I spun the wheel, threw the car into drive, and floored it toward the access road. My headlights swept across the parking lot as I turned, and for one terrible second, they illuminated the spot where the figure had been standing. Empty. Nothing there. Just asphalt and weeds and the faded lines of parking spaces that hadn't been used in decades. The thing had vanished, dissolved, stepped aside, blinked out of existence. And somehow that was worse than if I'd hit it. At least then, I would have known it was real. The access road stretched ahead of me, a narrow strip of pavement cutting through the desert toward the highway. I could see the interstate now, the distant glow of headlights from a passing truck, the promise of civilization and sanity, and everything this place wasn't. 200 yards, maybe less. I just had to make it to the highway and I'd be fine. My radio turned on by itself. Static filled the car, loud and harsh, the same crackling interference I'd heard through the payphone. I grabbed for the dial, tried to turn it off, but the knob wouldn't move. The static shifted, rearranged itself, and then the voice was back, coming through my speakers now, filling the car with that inhuman tone that sounded like something trying to remember how to speak. "You can't leave, Nate. Not until you understand." "I don't want to understand," I was shouting now, my voice cracking, my hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. "I just want to leave. Just let me leave." They all want to leave. The voice was almost gentle, almost sad. But they answered the phone. They heard me. And now they're part of this place, the same way I am, the same way everyone is eventually. The highway was getting closer. I could see the on-ramp now, the gentle curve that would take me back to I-80 and away from this nightmare. 50 yards. 30. I was going to make it. Whatever this thing was, whatever it wanted, I was going to outrun it and never look back. My engine died. The car rolled to a stop maybe 20 feet from the on-ramp, momentum carrying it forward until it came to rest in the middle of the access road. I turned the key frantically, pumping the gas, but nothing happened. The dashboard was dark. The headlights were out. Even my phone, sitting in the cup holder, had gone black, completely dead. No power, like something had drained every battery in the vehicle at once. I sat in the darkness, breathing hard, and watched as the figure emerged from the desert on my left. It walked onto the road ahead of me, moving with that same unhurried pace, and stopped directly between my car and the highway. This close, with nothing but starlight to see by, I could make out more details. The shape of a man, but stretched and distorted, limbs too long, shoulders too narrow, and where the face should have been, there was only a smooth, dark void, an absence of features that somehow felt like it was looking at me anyway. It raised one hand and pointed at me. Then it pointed back toward the rest stop, toward the building and the payphone and whatever waited there in the darkness. The meaning was clear. I wasn't leaving. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The voice came one more time, not from the radio now, but from the air itself, from the ground beneath my tires and the sky above my head. It surrounded me completely, and underneath it I could hear other voices, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all whispering the same words in overlapping layers. "Come back to the phone, Nate. There's someone who wants to talk to you." I don't know how long I sat there in the dead car, staring at the figure that blocked my path to the highway. Minutes, maybe. Could have been hours. Time had stopped working properly. The night felt stretched and warped, like the darkness itself was bending around this place, holding it separate from the rest of the world. Eventually, I got out of the car, not because I wanted to, not because I'd made any kind of decision. My body just moved, responding to some compulsion I couldn't name or resist. My legs carried me across the cracked pavement, back toward the rest stop, back toward the payphone that hung on the side of that dead building like a wound that wouldn't close. The figure didn't follow me. It just stood there on the access road, watching, making sure I went where I was supposed to go. The payphone was ringing again when I reached it. That old mechanical bell, impossibly loud in the silence, cutting through the night like something alive and hungry. The receiver hung on its hook now. I was certain I'd dropped it, certain it had been swinging on its cord when I ran. But everything about this place operated on a logic I didn't understand. I stood in front of the phone and watched it ring, each chime vibrating through my chest, and I knew that I was going to answer it, knew that I had no choice. I picked up the receiver and pressed it to my ear. The static was there, but fainter now, almost gentle. And through it came a voice I recognized, a voice I hadn't heard in almost 15 years, a voice that belonged to someone who couldn't possibly be calling me from a payphone in the Nevada desert. "Nate? Honey, is that you?" My mother. My mother, who had died when I was 12 years old, killed by a drunk driver on her way home from the grocery store. My mother, whose voice I'd almost forgotten, whose face I could barely picture anymore, whose absence had shaped every decision I'd made since the day she left. "Mom?" The word came out broken, childlike. I could feel tears streaming down my face, hot against my frozen cheeks. "Mom, that's not... you can't... I've been trying to reach you for so long, baby." Her voice was exactly as I remembered it, warm and soft and full of love. The voice that had sung me to sleep and read me stories and promised me that everything would be okay. "I've been waiting here, in this place between places, waiting for you to hear me." I wanted to believe it. God, I wanted to believe it so badly that my chest ached with the weight of it. 15 years of grief, of unanswered questions, of dreams where she was still alive, and I woke up to the cold reality that she wasn't. And now here was her voice, coming through a phone that shouldn't work, in a place that shouldn't exist, offering me something I'd never thought I'd have again. But something was wrong. The words were right, the tone was right, but there was something underneath, a texture, a wrongness, like a song played in the wrong key. And I remembered what the voice had told me earlier, about being what gets left behind, about being something hungry. "You're not her." I said it quietly at first, then louder, forcing the words past the desperate hope that was trying to strangle them. "You're not my mother. You're that thing. You're just wearing her voice." The static surged. The warmth in my mother's voice flickered, distorted, and for a moment I heard something else beneath it. That same inhuman tone from before, the sound of something ancient trying to remember how to be human. Then the warmth came back, steadier than before, more insistent. "I'm really here, Nate. I've been waiting so long. Don't you want to see me? Don't you want to come where I am, so we can be together again?" The air around me had changed. It was colder now, and thicker, and I realized I couldn't feel my feet anymore. When I looked down, I saw that the shadows on the ground had crept up past my ankles, wrapping around my legs like something alive. They were pulling me toward the building, toward a door I hadn't noticed before, a side entrance, half hidden behind a dumpster, standing open onto a darkness so complete it looked like a hole cut in the fabric of the world. "All you have to do is come inside," my mother's voice said. "Step through the door. It doesn't hurt, baby. It's just like falling asleep. And when you wake up, I'll be here. We'll be together. Isn't that what you've always wanted?" The shadows had reached my knees now. I could feel them pulling, feel the cold seeping into my bones, feel myself being drawn toward that open door and whatever waited beyond it. Part of me wanted to go. Part of me was so tired of running, so tired of losing, so tired of carrying the weight of everything I'd left behind. It would be easy to let go, easy to step through and let the darkness take me, to stop fighting and just rest. But another part of me, the part that had survived 15 years without her, the part that had kept going even when going felt impossible, that part knew what this really was. It wasn't a reunion. It wasn't peace. It was consumption. That thing in the wires, the hungry presence that haunted this forgotten place, it fed on people like me. People who were lost. People who were grieving. People who would follow a familiar voice into the dark because they had nothing left to lose. I thought about Rachel, the woman I'd failed. I thought about my brother, waiting for me in Sacramento, not knowing if I'd make it. I thought about all the things I still hadn't done, all the life I still hadn't lived, all the chances I'd thrown away because I was too scared to try. And I made a choice. No. I said it out loud, to the voice, to the shadows, to whatever was listening in the dark. I'm not going with you. I'm not ready to stop. The shadows around my legs tightened, and somewhere in the distance, I heard something scream. The scream wasn't human. It was the sound of something ancient and furious, something that had expected easy prey and found resistance instead. It tore through the air like a physical force, and as it faded, I felt the shadows around my legs loosen, not release, but weaken, like whatever was controlling them had been caught off guard. I didn't wait. I ripped my legs free and ran, not toward my car, but toward the highway, toward the distant glow of headlights that meant other people, real people, the world that existed outside this nightmare. The receiver fell from my hand, and I heard my mother's voice calling after me, pleading, turning angry, turning into something that didn't sound like her at all, a shriek of static and hunger that chased me across the parking lot. The figure appeared in front of me again, materializing from the darkness like it had always been there. I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. I lowered my shoulder and ran straight at it, expecting impact, expecting cold hands to grab me and drag me back to that open door. I passed through it like it was made of smoke. The cold hit me, a wave of ice that penetrated every cell of my body, that made my heart stutter and my vision blur. But I kept running. Behind me, I heard the voice howling, heard the static rising to a deafening roar, heard what sounded like 100 other voices joining in, all of them screaming in frustration and rage. The ground beneath my feet changed from cracked asphalt to gravel to the smooth pavement of the on-ramp, and then I was on the highway, stumbling into the road, waving my arms at the headlights that were bearing down on me. The truck nearly hit me. I saw the driver's face in the split second before he swerved, eyes wide, mouth open, hand already reaching for the horn. The blast of sound was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. Real sound, mechanical sound, the sound of the world I knew and understood. The truck screeched to a stop 50 feet past me, and I ran toward it, not looking back, not daring to see what might be standing at the edge of the rest stop's access road. The driver was a big man in his 50s, flannel shirt and trucker cap, the kind of face that had seen a lot of highway miles. He looked at me like I was insane, which at that moment I probably seemed to be. I was shaking, crying, trying to explain what had happened in words that wouldn't come out right. He didn't understand. How could he? But he let me climb into his cab anyway, let me sit in the passenger seat with the heat blasting and the radio playing some old country station, and he drove me away from that place without asking too many questions. I looked back once as we pulled onto the highway. The rest stop was dark, just a shape against the desert sky, indistinguishable from any other abandoned building along any other stretch of forgotten road. No figure standing at the entrance. No payphone visible from this distance. Just emptiness and silence and the fading memory of something that had almost swallowed me whole. The trucker, his name was Dale, drove me all the way to Winnemucca, dropped me at a gas station where I could call my brother, wait for the sun to come up, try to figure out what the hell had just happened to me. I never told him the full story, just said my car broke down and I'd gotten spooked by the dark. He nodded like he understood, like he'd seen his own share of strange things on these empty highways, and he wished me luck before pulling back onto I-80 and disappearing into the night. My brother drove 4 hours to pick me up. I slept in his guest room for a week, barely eating, barely speaking, trying to convince myself that I'd hallucinated the whole thing. exhaustion and stress, I told myself. A breakdown brought on by too much driving and too much grief. The mind plays tricks when you push it past its limits. There had to be a rational explanation. But I couldn't stop thinking about the voice, not the thing that had pretended to be my mother. I knew that was a trick, a lure, something designed to pull me into the dark. What haunted me was the other voice, the first one, the one that had known my name, known my story, known the weight I'd been carrying. It had called itself What Gets Left Behind, and some part of me understood exactly what that meant. I went back online a few weeks later, started researching. The Rest Stop had been closed in 1987, decommissioned due to budget cuts and declining traffic. Before that, it had been a regular waypoint for travelers crossing Nevada. Families, truckers, drifters, everyone who needed a place to stop and rest. I found one article, buried in a digitized archive from a Reno newspaper, about a string of disappearances along I-80 in the early 80s. 7 people over 3 years, all of them last seen in the vicinity of that rest stop. The cases were never solved. 7 people. And how many more since then, in the decades the place had been abandoned? How many travelers had pulled off the highway, seen a payphone ringing in the dark, and made the mistake of answering? The thing in that place had been feeding for 40 years, maybe longer, and it would keep feeding until someone tore down the building and salted the earth and made sure nothing could ever grow there again. I made it to Sacramento eventually, got a job, got an apartment, started rebuilding the life I'd run away from. I even called Rachel once, a few months later. Didn't ask her to take me back, just apologized for the things I'd done wrong. She didn't forgive me, but she listened. That was enough. I don't drive at night anymore. Don't stop at rest areas. Don't pull off at exits I don't recognize. Don't answer phones when I don't know who's calling. Sometimes late at night I hear ringing in my dreams. That old mechanical bell, distant but persistent, calling me back to a place I barely escaped. I wake up sweating, heart pounding, and I have to remind myself that I'm safe, that I'm hundreds of miles away, that the voice can't reach me here. But I know it's still out there, still waiting in the wires, in the walls, in the forgotten spaces between places, still hungry, still patient. And somewhere on I-80, between Elko and Winnemucca, there's a payphone that rings in the dark, waiting for someone to answer. I hope to God no one ever does. Story 4. The construction site. Voices calling my name. Nobody tells you how loud silence can be until you've spent a night alone in an unfinished building. I took the security job because I needed the money, and because I'd stopped being picky about 3 months earlier, right around the time my wife decided she'd rather be someone else's wife. The divorce had cleaned me out. Lawyers, the apartment she kept, the debt we'd accumulated together, but I'd inherited alone. When the temp agency called about a night watchman position at a construction site, I said yes before they finished describing the hours. 11 at night to 7 in the morning, 5 nights a week, walking the perimeter of a half-built hospital and making sure nobody stole copper wire or spray-painted the walls. Not glamorous, but the pay was decent, and it meant I didn't have to think about anything except putting one foot in front of the other. The site was massive, a new regional medical center going up on the edge of the city, 12 stories of concrete and steel skeleton rising out of what used to be an empty lot. During the day, the place swarmed with workers, crane operators, electricians, concrete crews, all the organized chaos of major construction. But at night, after the last truck pulled away and the floodlights clicked off, the whole site transformed into something else. A maze of shadows and scaffolding, of half-finished rooms and gaping elevator shafts, of sounds that echoed through empty corridors and made you question what you'd actually heard. My name is Derek Booth. I was 32 years old that October, and I'd been working the site for about 6 weeks when it started. 6 weeks of uneventful nights, walking my rounds with a flashlight and a radio, checking doors that weren't really doors yet, and fences that rattled in the wind. I'd gotten used to the sounds the building made, The creak of settling concrete, the ping of cooling metal, the way the wind whistled through the open floors like breath through a pipe organ. Normal sounds, explainable sounds, the vocabulary of a structure learning how to exist. The first time I heard my name, I was on the 4th floor. It was around 2 a.m., that dead stretch of night when time seems to slow down and the darkness feels heavier than it should. I was doing my standard walkthrough, flashlight beam cutting across bare concrete and exposed rebar, when I heard it, soft, almost gentle, coming from somewhere deeper in the floor. Derek? Not shouted, not whispered, just spoken, clearly and calmly, like someone was standing 20 feet away and wanted to get my attention. I stopped walking and swept my light across the space. Nothing but support columns and stacked materials, plastic sheeting that shifted in some unfelt breeze, the dark mouths of doorways leading to rooms that didn't have walls yet. The floor was empty, had to be empty. I checked the perimeter, locked the gates myself. Nobody could have gotten in without me knowing. "Hello?" My voice echoed back to me, flat and strange. "Anyone there?" Silence. Just the wind outside and the building's constant settling, those familiar sounds that suddenly didn't seem so familiar anymore. I stood there for a long moment, heart beating a little faster than I wanted to admit, ears straining for any hint of movement. Nothing came. After a minute or two, I convinced myself I'd imagined it, my own name echoing in my head, a trick of exhaustion and solitude. I'd been sleeping badly since the divorce. It wasn't unreasonable to think my brain was misfiring, hearing patterns in random noise. I finished my round and didn't mention it to anyone. The second time was 3 nights later on the 8th floor. I was checking a section where they'd just started running electrical conduit, my flashlight picking out the silver tubes against the gray concrete, when I heard it again. Derek. The same tone, the same clarity, but closer this time. Close enough that I spun around, certain I'd find someone standing right behind me. The floor was empty. The building was empty. I was alone with 12 stories of concrete and steel and shadows, and something was calling my name. I told myself it was an acoustic trick, sound bouncing through the elevator shaft maybe, or carrying from outside in some weird way. Construction sites were full of strange acoustics. I'd read about that somewhere. But when I got back to the security trailer that night and sat down with my thermos of coffee, my hands were shaking. Not a lot, just enough to notice. Just enough to make me wonder if I was losing my grip on something I couldn't name. The site had a history, though I didn't know it yet. The other guards, there were 3 of us rotating shifts, didn't talk much about the job beyond the basics. Clock in, walk the rounds, clock out. But I started noticing things after that second night. The way Martinez, who worked weekends, always did his checks in pairs of floors and never went above 10. The way the day shift supervisor changed the subject whenever I asked about the guards who'd worked here before me. The way nobody ever went into the basement after dark. I should have asked more questions, should have pushed harder, demanded answers, done literally anything except what I actually did, which was show up for my next shift and walk into that building like everything was normal. But I needed the money, and some part of me, the stubborn part, the part that had survived the divorce by refusing to fall apart, wanted to prove that I wasn't the kind of person who got spooked by shadows and strange sounds. That part of me was an idiot. By the end of my second month on the site, I would understand exactly what was calling my name from the unfinished floors. I would learn what had been buried beneath the foundation, what the construction had disturbed, and why the company kept hiring new night guards to replace the ones who quit without notice. But that night, sitting in the trailer with my cold coffee and my shaking hands, all I knew was that something in that building wanted my attention, and it was getting harder to ignore. The voices, because it became voices, plural, over the following weeks, didn't follow any pattern I could identify. Some nights I'd walk all 12 floors without hearing anything except the wind and my own footsteps. Other nights, They'd start the moment I stepped through the gate, calling my name from different directions, different floors, different distances. Always my name. Always that same calm, clear tone, like someone trying to get my attention without alarming me, like someone who knew me. I started keeping a log, not officially, just a small notebook I kept in my jacket pocket, where I'd jot down the time and location every time I heard something. After 2 weeks, I had 17 entries. 4th floor, 2:47 a.m. 8th floor, 1:15 a.m. Stairwell B, 4:30 a.m. The basement entrance, 11:52 p.m. That last one was the only time I'd heard it from down there, and I'd been standing at the top of the stairs when it happened, my name rising up from the darkness below like something bubbling up from deep water. I didn't go down to investigate. The door to the basement was supposed to stay locked anyway. That was in the protocols the company had given me, highlighted in yellow. Basement access, restricted after 6 p.m. I finally asked Martinez about it one evening during shift change. He was packing up his things, eager to get home, but something in my face must have stopped him. He set down his bag and looked at me for a long moment, like he was deciding whether to tell me the truth or let me figure it out on my own. "You've been hearing them," he said, not a question. I nodded. "Started a few weeks ago. Thought I was losing it at first." Martinez rubbed his face with both hands, the gesture of a man who was very tired of something he couldn't control. "You're not losing it. Everyone hears them eventually, the ones who work nights anyway. Day crew doesn't seem to have the same problem." "What are they?" I asked. "Who's doing this?" He picked up his bag and slung it over his shoulder, already moving toward the door. "Nobody's doing anything. It's the site. Something about this place. I don't know. I stopped asking questions after my 3rd week. You should too." He paused at the door, one hand on the frame. "Just don't go in the basement. Whatever you do, don't go down there. And if they start calling you from somewhere specific, somewhere they keep repeating, don't follow. That's when people get into trouble." He left before I could ask what kind of trouble he meant. The rain started that night around midnight, a steady downpour that drummed against the plastic sheeting and turned the unpaved sections of the site into rivers of mud. I did my rounds with my hood up and my flashlight cutting through sheets of water, the building looming above me like something waiting to swallow me whole. The sound of the rain made it harder to hear anything else, which should have been a relief. Instead, it just made me more paranoid, more certain that something was moving just outside my field of vision, using the noise as cover. I was on the 6th floor when the voices changed. It started with my name, same as always, Derek. But this time it didn't stop. This time there were words after it. A full sentence, spoken in that same calm tone, echoing through the empty floor like someone was standing just around the corner. "Derek, come down. We've been waiting for you." I froze mid-step, my flashlight beam trembling against the far wall. The rain hammered against the building's exposed frame, filling the silence between heartbeats. I waited for more, but nothing came. Just that one sentence, hanging in the air like smoke. "We." The voice had said "we," not "I," not a singular presence. "We." Multiple. Waiting. I should have left. Should have walked out of that building, driven home, called the temp agency in the morning and told them I was done. But something held me there, some combination of stubbornness and curiosity and the desperate need to understand what was happening. If I ran now, I'd never know. And the not knowing, I was starting to realize, might be worse than whatever truth was waiting in the dark. I made myself keep walking, finish the 6th floor, then the 7th, then the 8th. The voices didn't return that night, but I could feel them anyway. A presence in the walls, in the concrete, in the bones of the building itself. Something watching, something patient. The next morning, before I went home, I did something I probably shouldn't have. I went to the site office and found the filing cabinet where they kept the project records. Most of it was permits and schedules and budget reports, the mundane paperwork of construction. But near the back, in a folder that looked like it had been shoved there and forgotten, I found something else. A geological survey from before construction began, a series of photographs, and a memo from the project manager to the development company, dated 8 months earlier. The photographs showed what they'd found when they broke ground on the site. Not old pipes or forgotten infrastructure. That would have been normal for a lot this size in a city this old. What they found was a cemetery. Unmarked, unrecorded, probably dating back 100 years or more. Dozens of graves, maybe more, scattered across the footprint of the building like seeds in a field. The memo was brief and professional. It recommended halting construction until the remains could be properly excavated and relocated. The response, scrawled at the bottom in different handwriting, was even briefer. Proceed as planned. Budget doesn't allow for delays. They'd poured the foundation right on top of them. 12 stories of concrete and steel, built on a graveyard that nobody was supposed to know about. And whatever was down there had started calling my name. I should have quit after I found those documents. Should have walked out of the site office, driven straight to the temp agency, and told them to find someone else to babysit their haunted construction site. A smarter man would have done exactly that. But I kept thinking about the other guards, the ones who'd worked here before me, the ones nobody wanted to talk about. What had happened to them? Had they heard the voices too? Had they found the same folder, read the same memo, understood the same terrible truth about what this building was sitting on? I needed to know. That's the only way I can explain what I did next. I started researching on my own time, digging through historical records and old newspaper archives at the public library. The lot where they'd built the hospital had belonged to the city for over a century, used for various purposes over the decades. A workhouse in the 1890s, a sanatorium in the early 1900s, a county poorhouse until it closed in 1952. The kind of place where people went to die when they had nowhere else to go and no one to claim their bodies afterward. Paupers' graves, unmarked and unremembered, buried in soil that would eventually be paved over and forgotten. Except they hadn't been forgotten. Not really. They'd just been waiting. The voices got worse after I found out the truth. It was like they knew I understood now, like my knowledge had opened some kind of door between us. They called my name every night, sometimes constantly, sometimes in bursts that came and went like radio signals fading in and out. And they weren't just saying my name anymore. They were saying other things, fragments of sentences, pieces of conversations I couldn't quite follow. Come down, Derek. We remember. You can hear us. Nobody else listens. I started sleeping badly, even on my nights off. I'd lie in my apartment with the lights on, staring at the ceiling, hearing echoes of those voices in every creak and settle of the building around me. My appetite disappeared. I lost weight. My ex-wife called once about some paperwork we still needed to sign, and she asked if I was sick. I told her I was fine. I don't think either of us believed it. 3 weeks after I found the documents, the voices led me to the basement. It wasn't intentional. I was doing my rounds on the second floor, moving through a section that would eventually be an emergency room, when I heard it. Not just my name this time, but something else. A child's voice, high and thin, cutting through the adult tones like a needle through cloth. Please, it said. Please come. It's so dark down here. My flashlight flickered. The temperature dropped so suddenly I could see my breath misting in front of my face, even though it was October and the night had been mild. I stood there in the half-finished emergency room, surrounded by exposed wiring and plastic-wrapped equipment, and I heard that child's voice again, coming from below, from the basement. Please, we've been waiting so long. I walked toward the stairwell before I realized I was moving. It was like my legs had made the decision without consulting the rest of me. carrying me down the corridor and through the fire door and onto the concrete steps that led down into the dark. The basement door was at the bottom, heavy steel, painted gray, with a padlock that was supposed to keep everyone out. The padlock was hanging open. I was certain I'd checked it at the start of my shift. I checked it every night, but there it was, unlatched, the door standing slightly ajar like an invitation. The child's voice came again, drifting up from the darkness beyond the door. "Please, it hurts. Make it stop hurting." I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The smell hit me first, damp earth and something older, something organic and decayed, like a root cellar that had been sealed for decades. My flashlight cut a weak beam through the blackness, illuminating concrete pillars and drainage pipes and the massive foundation supports that held up the 12 stories above. The basement was huge, stretching out in all directions, sectioned off into rooms and corridors that hadn't been finished yet. Construction materials were stacked everywhere. Pallets of tile, coils of wire, bags of cement, casting strange shadows that shifted and jumped in my flashlight's unsteady glow. I walked deeper into the basement, following the sound of the child's voice. It stayed ahead of me, always just around the next corner, always just out of reach. "This way," it said. "We're over here. We've been waiting for you, Derek." The other voices joined in as I walked, rising up from the concrete floor like they were seeping through the foundation itself. Dozens of them now, maybe more, all speaking at once in a layered chorus that filled my head until I couldn't hear my own thoughts. They said my name. They said please. They said we remember, and nobody came, and it was so cold, and we couldn't get out. I stopped walking when I reached the far wall of the basement. My flashlight had started flickering badly, the beam cutting in and out like a dying heartbeat. In the moments of illumination, I could see that the wall in front of me was different from the others. Rougher, less finished, like the concrete had been poured in a hurry. And at the base of the wall, half buried in the floor, I could see something that made my stomach turn to ice. Bones. Small ones, the size of a child's hand, protruding from the concrete like flowers pushing up through soil. The voices stopped all at once, and in the silence that followed I heard something else. Footsteps, heavy and slow, coming from somewhere behind me in the dark. Coming closer. I turned around, and my flashlight died completely. The darkness in that basement was absolute, the kind of black that presses against your eyes, that makes you question whether you ever really knew what seeing was. I shook the flashlight desperately, slammed it against my palm, but nothing happened. The batteries had been fresh at the start of my shift. I'd checked them myself. The footsteps kept coming, slow and deliberate, the sound of weight settling on concrete, moving through the maze of pillars and stored materials somewhere to my left. I couldn't tell how far away they were. Sound did strange things in that space, bouncing off walls and surfaces until direction lost all meaning, but they were getting closer. I was certain of that much. I pressed my back against the rough wall, the wall with the bones, with the evidence of what this building had been constructed on, and tried to control my breathing. Panic would kill me faster than anything else down here. I needed to think, needed to remember the layout, needed to find my way back to the stairs before whatever was making those footsteps found me first. The voices started again, but different now. Quieter, more intimate. They whispered from the walls themselves, from the concrete and the rebar and the foundation that held up 12 stories of steel and ambition. "You found us," they said. "You came down. Nobody ever comes down." And then, underneath the whispers, that child's voice again. "Don't leave. Please don't leave us alone again." I started moving, keeping one hand on the wall, sliding along it toward where I thought the door should be. The footsteps adjusted, tracking me, matching my pace. Whoever, whatever, was in here with me. It knew the basement better than I did. It could see in the dark, or didn't need to see at all. I was stumbling blind through its territory, and it was letting me know. My hand found empty air where the wall should have continued. A doorway, one of the unfinished rooms sectioned off from the main space. I ducked inside without thinking, pressing myself into the corner, trying to make myself small. The footsteps paused. For a long moment, there was no sound at all except my own ragged breathing and the distant drip of water somewhere in the pipes overhead. Then something spoke. Not the chorus of whispers, not the child's pleading voice. Something else entirely. A single voice, deep and rasping, like gravel being dragged across stone. It came from just outside the doorway, close enough that I could have reached out and touched whoever was speaking. "They're not why I'm here," the voice said. "The dead don't walk these floors, boy. The dead stay where they're put, but they draw things to them, old things, hungry things, things that feed on what's been forgotten." I couldn't move, couldn't respond. My body had locked up completely, every muscle frozen, every nerve screaming at me to run while knowing that running was impossible. The voice continued, almost conversational, like we were two colleagues discussing the weather. This place was a wound before they built on it. All those people dying with no one to remember them. That kind of grief soaks into the ground, poisons it, makes it attractive to things that shouldn't exist anymore. A pause. A sound like dry laughter. I've been feeding here for 60 years, ever since the poorhouse closed and everyone forgot what was buried underneath. The construction just made it easier. More people coming and going, more workers to pick off when no one was watching. The pieces clicked together in my head with horrible clarity. The guards who'd worked before me, the ones nobody talked about, they hadn't quit. They'd disappeared, just like the vagrants who probably sheltered here before the site was fenced off, just like anyone else unlucky enough to wander into this place after dark. Whatever was standing outside that doorway, it wasn't a ghost. It was something worse, something that had made the cemetery its hunting ground and the voices its lure. "You heard them calling," the voice said. "You came down when they asked. That's more than most manage. Usually I have to work harder for my meals." I heard it move then, a rustle of fabric, the scrape of something against concrete. It was coming through the doorway, coming for me. I ran. I don't know how I found the stairs. Blind instinct, maybe, or some desperate muscle memory from all those nights walking the same routes through the building. I crashed into pillars, tripped over equipment, tore my hands open on something sharp I never saw. Behind me, I heard pursuit. Not footsteps anymore, but something faster, something that moved through the dark like it was part of it. The stairwell door appeared in front of me so suddenly I almost ran past it. I grabbed the handle, wrenched it open, and threw myself through. The thing behind me was close. I could feel the air pressure change, could smell something rotten and ancient in the space behind my head. I slammed the door shut and heard something hit the other side with enough force to rattle the hinges. I took the stairs 3 at a time, burst through the door at the top, and kept running. Through the second floor, through the emergency room that would never heal anyone, out into the construction site where the rain had stopped and the first gray light of dawn was starting to color the eastern sky. I didn't stop until I reached my car, didn't look back, didn't let myself think about what had almost happened in that basement. My hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries to get the key in the ignition. The engine turned over, the headlights cut through the pre-dawn gloom, and I drove out of that site like something was still chasing me. Maybe it was. I never went back to that site. Called the temp agency from my apartment that morning, told them I was done, told them they could mail my last check. The woman on the phone asked if something had happened, if there was a problem she could help with. I almost laughed. What was I supposed to say? That their client had built a hospital on top of a mass grave, and something had been living in the basement eating security guards for 6 decades. She would have thought I was insane. Some days, I still wonder if I am. The cuts on my hands took 2 weeks to heal. I'd torn them open on rebar or sheet metal or something else I never saw. and they got infected before I finally went to a clinic and got them properly cleaned. The nurse who treated me asked what happened, and I told her I'd had an accident at work. She didn't push for details. I think she could see in my face that I didn't want to talk about it. I tried to report what I'd found. Not the creature, but the cemetery. The bones in the foundation, the memo I'd seen in the project files. I called the city's historical preservation office, the state health department, even a journalist at the local paper who covered development issues. Nobody was interested. The construction company had permits, had approvals, had lawyers who could make problems disappear. One bureaucrat actually laughed when I mentioned unmarked graves, told me that half the city was probably built on top of someone's bones, and there was nothing anyone could do about it now. The hospital opened 14 months later. I watched the coverage on the news, the ribbon cutting, the smiling executives, the mayor talking about economic development and community health, 12 stories of glass and steel, state-of-the-art facilities, hundreds of beds for patients who would never know what they were sleeping on top of. I wondered how many of those patients would hear voices in the night. I wondered how many would dismiss them as fever dreams or medication side effects, never knowing that something underneath them was listening. I moved out of the city 6 months after the hospital opened. Couldn't stand being that close to it. Couldn't drive past without feeling my chest tighten and my hands start to shake. I found a job in a smaller town 2 hours north doing maintenance for an apartment complex. Day shift only. I made that clear during the interview. Said I had a medical condition that made night work impossible. They didn't ask for details. The nightmares followed me anyway. They always started the same way. I'd be walking through the unfinished floors of that building, flashlight cutting through the dark, and I'd hear the voices calling my name. Sometimes I'd make it to the basement door before I woke up. Sometimes I'd go through it, descend those concrete stairs, and find myself face to face with the thing that had been waiting for me. I never saw it clearly, even in dreams. Just an impression of size and wrongness, of something that had worn a human shape so long ago, it had forgotten what humans actually looked like. I tried therapy for a while. The counselor was kind, patient, good at her job. She helped me work through some of the trauma from the divorce, helped me understand why I'd been so desperate to prove myself at that job, even when every instinct told me to run. But I never told her about the voices, never told her about the basement, the bones, the thing that had spoken to me in the dark. Some experiences don't fit into the frameworks therapists use. Some things just have to be carried. I looked up Martinez once, about a year after I quit, found his number through some old paperwork, and called him on a Sunday afternoon, not sure what I wanted to say. He picked up on the fourth ring, and when I told him who I was, there was a long silence on the other end. "You got out?" he finally said. His voice sounded older than I remembered, tired in a way that went deeper than sleep could fix. "I wasn't sure you would." I asked him why he'd stayed, why he kept working nights at a place he knew was dangerous. He was quiet for a moment, and when he answered, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because it lets you go if you follow the rules. Don't go past the 10th floor. Don't go in the basement. Don't answer when they call you by name." A pause. "You answered, didn't you? You went down." I told him I had. Told him what I'd found, what I'd heard, what had almost happened before I made it to the stairs. "You're lucky," he said. "The last guy before you, Thompson, he went down too. They found his car in the parking lot 3 days later, keys still in the ignition. Never found him." Another pause, longer this time. "I don't think they ever will." We talked for a few more minutes, but there wasn't much else to say. He was still working the site, still walking his rounds, still following the rules that kept him alive. I asked him why he didn't just quit, and he laughed, a hollow, humorless sound that told me everything I needed to know. "Where else am I gonna go?" he said. "At least here I know what the monster looks like." I think about that sometimes, about Martinez, still walking those floors, about the thing in the basement, still feeding on anyone unlucky enough to wander into its territory, about the patients in that hospital, sleeping in their beds above a graveyard full of forgotten dead, never knowing what's listening to them from below. The voices still find me occasionally, even now. Late at night, when the world goes quiet and the darkness presses in, I'll hear something that sounds almost like my name, distant, muffled, like it's coming from very far away or very deep underground. I tell myself it's just my imagination, just the echo of a trauma I haven't fully processed. I tell myself that thing can't reach me here, 2 hours away, in a town it's never seen. But I sleep with the lights on anyway, and I never ever answer when something calls my name in the dark. Story 5. The breathing I heard through the wall. The apartment was too good to be true, and I should have known better than to trust that. 800 square feet in a pre-war building, hardwood floors, crown molding, a clawfoot tub in the bathroom, all for $1,200 a month in a neighborhood where studios went for twice that. The listing had been up for less than a day when I called, and the landlord seemed almost eager to rent it, waiving the usual background check and asking for only 1 month's security instead of 2. I signed the lease that afternoon and moved in 3 days later, convinced I'd stumbled onto some kind of urban miracle. My name is Camille Torres. I was 27 that fall, working as a paralegal at a firm downtown, freshly escaped from a relationship that had lasted 2 years longer than it should have. The apartment was supposed to be my fresh start, a place that was mine alone, where I could figure out who I was without someone else's expectations pressing in from every side. I'd never lived by myself before. The silence took some getting used to, but I told myself that was normal. Everyone feels a little unmoored at first. Everyone hears sounds they can't explain when they're adjusting to a new space. The building was old, built in the 1920s according to the date carved into the limestone above the entrance. 6 stories, 12 units, the kind of place that had probably been elegant once and had since settled into a comfortable shabbiness. The hallways smelled like old wood and radiator heat, and the elevator made sounds that suggested it was being operated by ghosts. My apartment was on the 4th floor, Unit 4B, wedged between the stairwell and Unit 4A, which, according to my landlord, had been vacant for almost a year. Previous tenant moved out suddenly, he'd said when I asked. Mr. Brannigan was his name, a heavy-set man in his 60s with the distracted air of someone who managed too many properties to care about any of them individually. Haven't gotten around to renovating it yet. You'll have the whole floor to yourself, basically. Nice and quiet. Nice and quiet. That's exactly what I wanted. And for the first 2 weeks, that's exactly what I got. I unpacked my boxes, arranged my furniture, hung pictures on walls that were thick enough to muffle any sound from the units above or below. The building was peaceful in a way my old place had never been. No thumping bass from upstairs neighbors, no arguments bleeding through the ceiling, no sounds of other people living their lives just inches away from mine. I slept better than I had in months. I started cooking again, started reading again, started feeling like myself for the first time since the breakup. Then I started hearing the breathing. It was subtle at first, so subtle that I dismissed it as imagination, as the building settling, as some quirk of old plumbing or ventilation that I hadn't learned yet. I'd be lying in bed at night, drifting toward sleep, and I'd become aware of a sound coming from the wall behind my headboard, the wall I shared with the vacant apartment next door. A soft, rhythmic sound, in and out, like someone sleeping just on the other side of the plaster. The first few times, I told myself it was my own breathing I was hearing, amplified somehow by the acoustics of the room. I'd hold my breath and listen, and sometimes the sound would stop, and I'd feel foolish for being paranoid. But other times it continued, that slow, steady rhythm that had nothing to do with my lungs, nothing to do with anything I could control or explain. I knocked on the wall once, in the middle of the night, when the sound was louder than usual. 3 sharp raps, the kind of thing you do when you want a noisy neighbor to quiet down. The breathing stopped immediately, just cut off, like someone had been caught doing something they shouldn't. I lay there in the dark, heart pounding, ears straining for any hint of movement. Nothing came. After 10 minutes of silence, I convinced myself I'd scared off a raccoon or a pigeon that had somehow gotten into the walls. Old buildings had pests. That was normal. That was fine. But the next night, it was back. And the night after that. And the night after that. I started sleeping with music on, just loud enough to mask the sound. Started keeping my headboard pulled a few inches away from the wall, as if that thin gap could protect me from whatever was on the other side. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I'd lived in the city for 6 years and dealt with far worse than some mysterious breathing sounds. Rats in the walls, pigeons in the vents. A building this old was bound to have wildlife living in the spaces between apartments. Except the breathing didn't sound like an animal, it sounded human, it sounded close. And sometimes, late at night, when the city went quiet and there was nothing to hear except that soft, rhythmic whisper from the other side of my bedroom wall, it sounded like it was waiting for something. I finally worked up the nerve to mention it to Mr. Brannigan 3 weeks after I moved in. Caught him in the lobby one morning, told him I'd been hearing strange sounds from the vacant unit next door. He looked at me with something I couldn't quite read. Not surprise exactly, but not confusion either. Something more like resignation. Probably just the pipes, he said. Old building like this, the plumbing does all kinds of weird things. I'll have someone take a look. He never sent anyone, and the breathing never stopped. By the end of my first month in that apartment, I'd learned to sleep through it most nights. Learned to ignore the way it seemed to speed up when I was anxious, slow down when I was calm, almost like it was synchronized to my own rhythms. Learned to tell myself that there was a rational explanation, even if I hadn't found it yet. But I couldn't ignore what I heard on the 32nd night, because that was the night the breathing wasn't alone anymore. That was the night I heard it whisper my name. I told myself I'd imagined it, told myself I'd been half asleep, dreaming, caught in that hazy space between consciousness and rest, where the brain conjures things that aren't real. But I'd been awake. I knew I'd been awake because I'd been lying there for over an hour, unable to sleep, listening to that familiar rhythm from the other side of the wall. In and out. In and out. And then, so soft I almost missed it, threaded through the exhale like smoke through air. Camille. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Sat up in bed with the lights on, watching the wall like it might open up and reveal whatever was hiding behind it. The breathing had stopped after the whisper, cut off the same way it had when I'd knocked weeks earlier. But this time, I hadn't done anything to startle it. This time it had simply said what it wanted to say and gone silent, like a message delivered. The next morning, I did something I probably should have done weeks earlier. I walked down to the lobby, found the super's office, and asked for access to apartment 4A. The super was a wiry man named Tedesco who always seemed to be in the middle of fixing something. He looked up from the pipe fitting he was working on and shook his head before I'd even finished asking. "Can't let you in there," he said. "Landlord's orders. Nobody goes in 4A until they're ready to renovate." "I've been hearing sounds," I said, "coming from that unit, every night. I think someone might be living in there without permission." Tedesco's expression flickered, just for a moment, just long enough for me to notice, before settling back into professional neutrality. "Building's old," he said. "Sounds travel, could be coming from anywhere." He turned back to his pipe fitting, clearly done with the conversation. "I'll mention it to Brannigan." He didn't mention it to Brannigan. Or if he did, Brannigan didn't care. I waited a week for someone to follow up, to check the unit, to do literally anything about my complaint. Nobody came, nobody called, and every night the breathing continued, that soft, steady rhythm that had become the soundtrack of my sleepless hours. I started doing research, spent my lunch breaks at the office searching public records, trying to find out anything I could about the building, about Unit 4A, about whoever had lived there before. The building had changed hands several times over the decades, cycled through various owners and management companies, but the records were spotty and incomplete. What I did find was a single newspaper article from 2019, 3 years before I'd moved in, about a woman who'd gone missing from an address that matched my building. Her name was Helen Marsh, 42 years old, lived alone, worked as a librarian at a branch downtown. She'd stopped showing up for work one October, and when her colleagues finally called the police to check on her, her apartment was empty. No signs of struggle, no note, no indication of where she'd gone or why. The case had never been solved, and the article ended with the usual plea for anyone with information to contact the police. The article didn't specify which unit Helen Marsh had lived in, but I already knew. I felt it in my bones, in the crawling sensation at the back of my neck, in the way the breathing seemed louder that night than it had ever been before. Helen Marsh had lived in 4A. Helen Marsh had disappeared, and something was still in there, waiting, breathing through the wall. I bought a stethoscope from a medical supply store the next day. Felt absurd doing it, like a character in a horror movie making the exact wrong decision, but I needed to know. Needed to understand what I was dealing with before I could figure out how to make it stop. That night, after midnight, I pressed the chest piece against the wall behind my bed and listened. The breathing was clearer through the stethoscope, amplified and intimate in a way that made my skin crawl. I could hear the subtle variations I'd been missing, the slight catch at the top of each inhale, the whistle at the end of each exhale, the wet quality that suggested lungs that weren't working quite right. It wasn't the breathing of someone healthy. It was the breathing of someone struggling, laboring, fighting for each breath like it might be their last. And then, as I listened, it changed. The rhythm broke, stuttered, became something faster and more erratic, like whoever was breathing had realized I was listening. Like they could feel my attention pressing through the wall the same way I could feel their presence. The whispering started again. Not my name this time. Something else. Something longer. A string of syllables I couldn't quite make out. I pulled the stethoscope away, heart hammering, and the sound bled through the wall even without amplification. That wet, labored voice, speaking words that might have been English or might have been something older. Something that predated language as I understood it. I scrambled off the bed and pressed myself against the far wall of my bedroom, as far from the shared wall as I could get. The whispering continued for another 30 seconds, then faded back into the familiar rhythm of breath, in and out, like nothing had happened, like it had said what it needed to say and was content to wait again. I didn't sleep at all that night. Sat in my living room with every light on, wrapped in a blanket, watching the bedroom door like something might come through it. The breathing continued until dawn, steady and patient, and I swore I could feel it pressing against the wall, a weight, a presence, something that wanted in. When the sun finally rose, I called in sick to work. Then I called a locksmith and had him change every lock in my apartment, even though I knew it wouldn't help. Whatever was in 4A, it wasn't coming through the door. It was already inside the walls, and it knew my name. I tried to leave, packed a bag that same morning, called my sister in New Jersey, told her I needed to stay with her for a few days. She didn't ask questions. We'd always been close, and she could hear something in my voice that told her not to push. I was halfway to Penn Station when I realized I'd left my laptop at the apartment, the one with all my work files, the one I absolutely needed if I was going to keep my job while hiding from whatever was breathing through my bedroom wall. I went back. That was my first mistake. The apartment felt different when I unlocked the door, though I couldn't say exactly how. The air seemed thicker, heavier, charged with something that made the hair on my arms stand up. I moved quickly through the living room, grabbed my laptop from the desk, shoved it into my bag. I was almost to the front door when I heard it, Not breathing this time, but something else. A sound from the shared wall in the bedroom, like knuckles dragging slowly across plaster. Like someone running their fingers along the surface from the other side, tracing patterns I couldn't see. I should have kept walking, should have been out the door and down the stairs and on a train to New Jersey before whatever was in that wall could do anything else. But something made me stop. Something made me turn toward the bedroom, toward that sound, toward the presence I'd been running from for weeks. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the desperate need to understand. Or maybe it was something else, some pull I couldn't name, some gravity that the thing in 4A had been building around me since the first night I'd heard it breathe. I walked to the bedroom doorway and looked inside. The wall behind my bed was bulging. Not dramatically, not like something was about to burst through, but enough to notice. A subtle swelling in the plaster, a curve where there should have been a flat surface. As I watched, it pulsed. Once, twice. Like something on the other side was pressing against it, testing its strength, seeing how much pressure the old plaster could take. The breathing started again, louder than I'd ever heard it. Not muffled by the wall anymore, but somehow present in the room itself, filling the space around me until I couldn't tell where it was coming from. And underneath the breathing, that wet whisper I'd heard through the stethoscope, words that weren't quite words, sounds that seemed to bypass my ears and settled directly into my brain. I ran. Left my laptop, left my bag, left everything except my phone and my keys. Took the stairs because I couldn't stand the thought of waiting for the elevator, of being trapped in that small metal box while whatever was in the walls figured out how to reach me. I burst through the lobby doors and didn't stop until I was 3 blocks away, gasping for breath on a busy street corner while pedestrians gave me concerned looks and a wide berth. I didn't go to New Jersey. Instead, I went to the public library and spent the next 4 hours digging deeper into Helen Marsh's disappearance. The newspaper article I'd found was just the beginning. There were police reports, filed and forgotten in the city's digital archives, interviews with neighbors who'd heard strange sounds from her apartment in the weeks before she vanished. A note from the investigating detective mentioning that the walls of Unit 4A had shown signs of unusual structural damage that couldn't be explained by normal wear and tear. The case had been classified as a missing person, but reading between the lines, it was clear the police suspected something worse. They just couldn't prove it. The deepest I dug, the worse it got. Helen Marsh wasn't the first person to disappear from that building. In 1987, a man named Arthur Combs had vanished from Unit 4A under nearly identical circumstances. No signs of struggle, no note, just an empty apartment and neighbors who reported hearing strange sounds through the walls. Before that, in 1962, a young couple named the Hardings had lived in 4A for 3 months before the wife was found dead in the bedroom and the husband was never seen again. The official cause of death was heart failure, but the coroner's notes mentioned unexplained contusions and significant weight loss inconsistent with the timeline. 3 disappearances, 3 tragedies, all connected to the same apartment spanning 60 years. And now I was living on the other side of its wall, listening to something breathe every night, hearing it whisper my name like a promise or a threat. I found one more thing before I left the library, a scanned document from the building's original construction records, dated 1924. The architect's notes mentioned that the site had previously been home to a private sanitarium, demolished in 1919 after a fire killed 11 patients and 3 staff members. The bodies had been recovered, but the building had been considered too damaged to repair. They'd torn it down and built apartments on the foundation, and according to the notes, several workers had refused to complete the project. One of them was quoted as saying he'd heard sounds coming from the walls, breathing sounds, like something was trapped inside and trying to get out. 100 years. Whatever was in that building had been there for 100 years, moving through the walls, breathing through the plaster, taking people from Unit 4A when they got too close or stayed too long. And I'd been sleeping 6 inches away from it for over a month, separated by nothing but old lathe and horsehair plaster. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from an unknown number, just 3 words that made my blood turn to ice. "Come back, Camille." I stared at the screen, hands shaking, watching the cursor blink. Then another message appeared, letter by letter, like someone was typing it in real time. "I can hear you breathing too." I went to the police, showed them the texts, told them about the breathing, the research, the pattern of disappearances stretching back decades. The officer who took my statement was patient and professional, but I could see the skepticism behind his eyes. He wrote everything down, promised to send someone to check on the building, and suggested I stay somewhere else for a few nights while they investigated. I thanked him and left, knowing that nothing would come of it. Whatever was in that building had been taking people for 100 years without anyone stopping it. A single police report wasn't going to change that. I stayed with my sister for 3 days. 3 days of jumping at every sound, of checking my phone obsessively for messages that didn't come, of lying awake at night and listening to my own breathing like it was something foreign and threatening. My sister asked what was wrong, and I told her I was having trouble with a neighbor. She didn't believe me. I could see it in her face, but she didn't push. She just made up the guest room and let me hide. On the 4th day, I got a call from Mr. Brannigan. "Good news," he said, his voice as distracted as ever. "Had the building inspector take a look at 4A. No signs of squatters, no structural issues, nothing out of the ordinary. Probably just the pipes, like I said. Should be all clear for you to come back." I wanted to scream at him. Wanted to tell him about Helen Marsh and Arthur Combs and the Hardings, about the sanitarium that had burned down before the building was even constructed, about the texts I'd received from something that could hear me breathing from miles away. But I knew it wouldn't matter. Brannigan didn't care. Brannigan just wanted his rent check and his quiet tenants and his plausible deniability. "I'm breaking my lease," I said. "I'll have my things out by the end of the week." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Brannigan spoke again, his voice had changed, harder, flatter, stripped of the distracted friendliness I'd come to expect. "That's not going to work, Miss Torres. You signed a 12-month agreement. There are penalties for early termination." "I don't care about the penalties. I'll pay whatever you want. I'm not going back there." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "You've already gone back, Camille. You just don't remember." The line went dead. I sat there for a long moment, staring at my phone, trying to process what he'd said. That wasn't Brannigan's voice at the end. Not really. It had sounded like him, had used his words and his cadence, but underneath it I'd heard something else. That wet, labored quality I recognized from the wall. That sound of lungs that weren't working right, of breath being forced through passages that had never been meant for air. My sister found me an hour later, still sitting in the same spot, still staring at the phone in my hand. She asked what was wrong, and when I didn't answer, she took the phone and looked at the call log. Her face went pale. "Camille," she said slowly, "there's no call here. The last incoming call was from me, 2 days ago." I grabbed the phone back, scrolled through the log. She was right. No call from Brannigan. No record of the conversation I'd just had, the voice I'd just heard, the words that were still echoing in my head. "You've already gone back. You just don't remember." That night I dreamed of the apartment. I was standing in my bedroom, facing the shared wall, watching it pulse and bulge in the darkness. The breathing was everywhere, not just from the wall, but from inside me, like my own lungs had learned its rhythm and forgotten how to do anything else. The plaster cracked, split, peeled away in long strips that curled toward the floor like dead skin. And behind it, in the darkness of the space between walls, something was waiting. I couldn't see it clearly, just impressions, pale and shapeless and somehow wrong, like a body that had been squeezed into a space too small for it and had learned to grow in ways bodies weren't supposed to grow. It had no face that I could recognize, but I knew it was looking at me. I could feel its attention like a weight on my chest, pressing down, pressing in, making it harder and harder to breathe. It spoke without moving, without sound, the words appearing in my head fully formed like they'd always been there. You came back. I knew you would. They always come back. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, my sister shaking me and calling my name. It was 3 a.m. I'd been asleep for less than 2 hours, and there was something wrong with my hands. I held them up in the dim light from the hallway, and my stomach dropped. My fingernails were packed with plaster dust. White powder was caked in the creases of my palms, caught in the fine hairs on my wrists. I looked down at myself and saw more of it, on my clothes, in my hair, smeared across my face in patterns that looked like they'd been made by fingers. My sister was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Fear, confusion, something close to horror. "Camille," she whispered. "Where did you go? I checked on you an hour ago and you were here. You were right here in this bed." I couldn't answer her, couldn't explain what I didn't understand myself. All I could do was stare at my hands and think about what the voice on the phone had said. "You've already gone back. You just don't remember." The plaster dust smelled like old wood and radiator heat. It smelled like the hallway of my building. It smelled like home. And somewhere, underneath my own panicked breathing, I could hear another rhythm. Faint, but familiar, coming from somewhere inside my chest. In and out, in and out, like something had followed me back. My sister wanted to take me to a hospital. I refused. How could I explain plaster dust under my fingernails, an impossible phone call, a breathing sound that had migrated from a wall in Brooklyn to somewhere inside my own chest? They'd think I was having a breakdown. Maybe I was. Maybe that would have been easier to accept than the truth. I went back to the apartment the next morning. Not because I wanted to, every cell in my body screamed against it, but because I needed to know. Needed to understand what had happened during those lost hours, what I'd done while my conscious mind was sleeping in my sister's guest room. I took my sister with me, made her promise not to leave my side, and we drove into the city together as the sun climbed over the skyline and the world pretended to be normal. The building looked the same as always, shabby, old, unremarkable. We took the stairs to the 4th floor, my heart pounding harder with each step, that second rhythm in my chest keeping pace like a shadow. The hallway was empty. The door to 4B was closed. Everything was exactly as I'd left it 4 days earlier. But the door to 4A was open, not all the way, just a few inches, just enough to see darkness beyond it. My sister grabbed my arm, told me we should leave, told me we should call someone. I shook her off and walked toward that gap like I was being pulled by a string. The breathing in my chest was louder now, faster, synchronized with something I couldn't see but could feel waiting just beyond that door. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The apartment was a mirror of mine, same layout, same bones, same pre-war details, but wrong in ways that took me a moment to process. The walls were covered in handprints, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, pressed into plaster that had gone soft and gray like rotting flesh. They overlapped and intersected, large hands and small hands, fresh prints and ancient ones, a gallery of everyone who had ever touched these walls and left something of themselves behind. And in the center of the living room, where there should have been a floor, there was a hole. It wasn't a structural collapse or a construction flaw. It was deliberate. A perfect circle maybe 6 feet across, the edges smooth and worn like they'd been rubbed by decades of passage. The hole went down into darkness, so complete that my flashlight couldn't find the bottom. And from that darkness came the breathing I knew so well, amplified now, resonant, the sound of lungs that had grown too large for any human body. My sister was calling my name from the hallway, begging me to come back, but her voice sounded far away, muffled by something I couldn't see. I walked to the edge of the hole and looked down. The darkness looked back. I understood then. The thing in the walls wasn't a ghost or a demon or anything I had a name for. It was something older, something that had been here before the building, before the sanitarium, before the city itself. It lived in the spaces between things, in the gaps and the voids, and the places where the world hadn't quite finished forming. The building hadn't awakened it. The building had just given it a shape, a structure, a way to reach the people who lived above it. The walls were its lungs, the apartments were its hunting ground, and Unit 4A was its mouth. The breathing shifted, and I felt something change in my chest, that second rhythm speeding up, pulling at me, trying to drag me forward into the hole. I understood that too. Whatever had followed me back from the apartment, whatever had gotten inside me during those lost hours, it was connected to the thing below. A piece of it, planted like a seed, waiting to bloom. I could feel it growing, could feel it pressing against my ribs, wrapping around my lungs, learning the shape of me from the inside out. If I stayed, if I let it finish what it had started, I would become another handprint on the wall, another name in the building's history of disappearances, another meal for something that had been feeding on this city for longer than anyone knew. I stepped back from the edge. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, fighting against that pull, that gravity, that voice in my chest telling me to let go and fall and finally stop running. But I thought about my sister in the hallway. I thought about Helen Marsh and Arthur Combs and all the others who hadn't made it out. I thought about the life I still wanted to live, the person I still wanted to become. And I ran. We made it out of the building and kept going, drove straight to a church in Midtown, one of the old ones, stone walls and stained glass and centuries of prayers soaked into every surface. I'm not religious, never have been, but I didn't know where else to go. The priest who found us must have seen something in my face because he didn't ask questions, just led me to a pew and let me sit there shaking while my sister explained as much as she could. I don't know if what happened next was an exorcism or a blessing or just the placebo effect of being somewhere that felt safe. The priest spoke words I didn't understand, made signs I didn't recognize, and somewhere in the middle of it, I felt that second rhythm in my chest stutter and fade. Not disappear, I'm not sure it ever fully disappeared, but quiet, dormant, like something going back to sleep. I never returned to the apartment. Had movers pack up my things while I stayed in New Jersey, and I didn't keep anything that had been in the bedroom. I broke the lease by certified mail and ignored every attempt Brannigan made to contact me about penalties or deposits or anything else. That was 8 months ago. I live in California now, in a house with no shared walls and no basement and no spaces where something could hide and breathe. I sleep with a white noise machine and a light on, and I've learned not to listen too closely to the silence. Some nights I still feel it, that faint second rhythm, barely perceptible, pulsing somewhere behind my sternum. The doctors say it's anxiety. I let them believe that, but I know the truth. Whatever was in that building got a piece of me, and whatever piece it took, it's still connected, still listening, still breathing when I breathe, waiting for the day I forget to be careful, waiting for the moment I let my guard down and follow some sound I shouldn't follow into some darkness I shouldn't enter. I won't go back to New York, won't go near that building or that neighborhood or anything that reminds me of those walls. But sometimes, late at night, I hear something that sounds almost like my name, whispered from very far away, carried on a breath that isn't mine. And I have to remind myself not to answer,